And good morning, everybody. Peter Boyles on the air everywhere actually, George is off in the military this morning. Good morning. It's Wednesday, July the 26th, 2023. Good to be back. And I also get to do Friday for George at 6 a.m. and then turn around and come back in and do our Saturday morning show at 9 here on 710 KNUS. The weather, well, it speaks for itself. 94 and maybe afternoon rain, 63 tonight. 94 Thursday, Friday, maybe some storms again, and 95 on Friday. Good morning. It's good to be here. Billy Thorpe, Peter Boyles on the air everywhere. And Monday, I went and saw Oppenheimer. And I can't tell you how much I enjoyed that film. It's great. So we have invited Professor David Smith from Baylor on to talk about that film and to talk about Oppenheimer and to talk about Harry Truman, Joe Stalin, and what kind of sets the pace or sets what is going to come next. But the Oppenheimer film, if you've seen it and you want to make comments about it now, I'd love to hear from you. And then sports betting, players betting. And they have apparently, the NFL suspended a Broncos player for gambling violations. The NFL suspended a Denver Bronco player indefinitely for violating the league's gambling policy. So there's no one better than Joe Williams, the hitman, and hopefully Sandy Clough, the two of them. I know we have Joe down. Joe will be with us at 9. But the league they put guys out. I was reading last night, getting ready for the show, and this is not the first guy. And the league suspended 5 players, 4 from the Detroit Lions, 1 from the Washington, now known as Commanders, for violating the league's gambling policies. And Lions, there's a Lions wide receiver and others. I don't get this. And it goes back to Pete Rose and the rest of those things, but I don't understand it. And one of the things that Joe will talk about is the interlocking relationships now between these gambling conglomerates. I mean, they're huge, and the NFL has a part of it. And I guess even a bigger part than I was aware of. And the NFL itself is now involved in gambling. Who can explain that to me? I don't pay much attention to that stuff, but the new ways of gambling and how it affects talk radio, as we have talked about many times, sports talk radio and just regular radio stations have dropped their formats, whatever they were, middle of the road music or whatever it was, and they've gone sports betting. And it happened at KEZW, K. Rick Crandall, right? And Ricky and those guys just got put out on their ear, and now they just sell sports betting. And if you listen to any of the sports stations in town, and a lot of good friends are working on those jobs, and it's sports betting. And now some football player bets. And what do? They suspend them. Now, if you're not, it's like if you're betting against yourself, in other words, if you're going to throw a game or throw a fight or something like that, that's one thing. But if you're betting on another fight or another football game or another baseball game that you have nothing to do with, you're just like this everyday guy. Okay, I'll put a bet down. But apparently the league that now pretends itself to be clean, I don't know. So you may want to comment on that. 303-696-1971. Joe Biden's dog. I just got the big bang out of Joe Biden's dog. Joe Biden's dog has bitten 10 people in 4 months. Have you guys seen that? I told Billy, I now believe that cocaine was Joe Biden's dog's cocaine. They said, I think they remember the cocaine bear? It's like the cocaine command. His name is Commander. Of course it is. And it's a German Shepherd, an Alsatian, and it's bitten or attacked Secret Service personnel. Keep them away. And that's the first thing I thought. They taught Commander, we don't want these people watching what we're doing. Sick Commander on them. We can go get high. But apparently, at least 10 times between October 22nd and January, including one incident that required hospitalization by the injured law enforcement officer, according to records from the Department of Homeland Security. Okay, and I'll let it go, but Commander the dog is the second dog of the Bidens to behave aggressively. Do dogs reflect the personalities of their owners? Do they? I thought about this last night. Commander is the second mutt in the Bidens that behaved badly, including this other dog bit Secret Service personnel and White House staffers. And they eventually sent the dog, another German Shepherd. His name was Major. Everybody's got military rank. Major, to live with Winky, to live with friends in Delaware. Major took the gas pipe. Remember that? Your dad found that dog a very good home. Right. Remember Tony Soprano and the dog, and he gave it to his girlfriend's kid? Well, that was one of the great lines when we'd bring mutts home, find him. The old man's not going to feed another mouth. Where's Brownie? Your dad found that dog a very good home. That dog went out to the farm to live. So when I'm reading the stuff here about what happened to Major went to the farm. Show of hands. How many people believe Major went to the farm? Major took the gas pipe. That's what happened to Major. I said, okay, get rid of Major. And then they bring in Commander. Patsy Ramsey. Remember when I got in trouble for this? Patsy Ramsey was a Francophile. She was like, there's people that just enamored with French culture, British culture, and I think they're called Francophiles. And remember, because she learned, like in Jean Bonnet's name, she would put the little, I don't know what that accent mark is called. In German, I think it's called an umlaut, where they put a little mark above a letter. And as you probably well know, that the Jean Bonnet is a French version of John Bennett. That's John Bennett Ramsey, her father. And Patsy, little Francophile. And it's like when the Patsy writes the ransom note, and she puts that little mark above attaché. Like, who does that? Oh, well, kidnappers do that. And she put the little, what is the thing called? Somebody tell me, 303-696-1971, that mark. Anyhow, long story short, they had a dog. And the dog's name was Jacques. Of course it was. And so Jacques had a bad ear, and its ear wasn't straight. And so when the kids go off to school, Patsy, because everything had to be perfect, went back to the breeder and said, "This dog's ear is cocked. We need a dog with the right ear." And so they were kind of afraid of Patsy throwing her weight around as a society, or saw herself as some society maven in Boulder. So they replaced the dog. So as the story goes, the kids come home from school and there's Jacques. They said, "That's not Jacques." "Yeah, kids, that's Jacques." "Oh, Mommy, I don't think that's Jacques." "Kids, that's Jacques." So I got onto the story and I called it the second Jacques on the grassy knoll, which you could see why people were upset about that, but Jacques the dog. And so Commander replaces Major, and they said, and I read this to you, Major has gone to a farm in Delaware to stay with friends. Now, see, I don't care how good your friends are, but if they got some German Shepherd just biting people, do you think I'm going to take it? Huh? That dog's a bullet. I'm going, Peter, yeah, hey, man, it's my brother. Yeah, how you doing? I got this dog. And it's like it's bit the mailman 5 times. It bit a couple of neighbors, and chases the school bus. What do you say, buddy? Take this dog off my hands. Oh, yeah, sure. Ship it, right? And then I'll get you a worse dog. Joe Biden's dog. How many people really? 303-696-1971. Because we're going to get serious later on in the morning. But how many of you believe? How many of you believe that Major the dog is still alive? This is part of QAnon, right? This is part of Q. But how many of you believe that Major made the cut? I don't think they put a red shirt on Major. But I'll read it to you again. Commander is the second of the Biden's dogs, and I love how they write about this, to behave aggressively, including biting Secret Service personnel and White House staffers. They, I don't know who they is, Dr. Jill, eventually sent the dog, a German Shepherd named Major, to live with friends in Delaware. Wait a minute. The French mark is called an accent E-G-U-L-E. Okay, I'll buy that. Patsy put it on attaché Jean Bonnet. So the president's dog, Commander, bit or otherwise has attacked many Secret Service agents at least 10 times between October 22 and January, including one incident that required a hospital visit. Now, there's so much to this story. Do dogs reflect their owners? I think, Bill, do they? I mean, you got some mutts. Do they reflect your family? I mean, your dog's cool.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
My dog has some issues at times too, though.
Well,
So just like the family and the owner does. Yeah, the dogs, in my opinion, take on much of the owner's personality and, more importantly, the energy inside the environment.
Yeah.
If the environment is chaotic and somewhat weird and aggressive, then the dog takes that on as well. And yes, the fact that the dogs of the Bidens have been biting Secret Service agents, yes. That is reflective of the Bidens and how they're raising the dog.
See, I thought so as well last
110%.
night. I thought so last night. I said, well, no, hold on.
Yeah.
If you have one bad dog.
Yeah.
Bad dog.
Yeah.
This is great. Somebody from the wall. We need proof of life.
Yes, we do.
We need, if Major's still alive.
Yeah.
Major's long gone.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have no idea what happened to Major. I could agree with you on that one. That maybe he's crossed the Rainbow Bridge already, but not by his own choice. But
one road space mountain.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The thing is, it's going to take on the Biden personality and the family personality. The other part is the fact that the dog is biting people. There are a couple of things. One, I don't think they're properly socializing the dog beforehand, nor is the dog comfortable enough, or for whatever reason, around other people. I mean, there's one gentleman in our neighborhood that our dog wants to eat his face. I mean, it is every time she sees him, it's like, it is go time. And the reason is because when she was younger and he'd walk by our fence, because we're on a corner, the dog, she would bark at him and he would pound the fence back at her. And she's like, oh, I'm going to kill you now. Yeah. This is how bad it is with him. There was one time where we were walking and I see him probably 30 yards or so in front of us, and he turns a corner and walks away. My dog doesn't see him yet. We get near that corner where he just was, and she stops dead. And she's up in the air sniffing around like, where is that MFer? I need him now. I am going to take him finally. And she is just like, I'm ready. And I'm like, no, he's gone. And she's looking around like, where is this mother? Yeah, she is ready. And so that, yeah, absolutely, based on individual interactions, but the fact that it's gone after several people, that is that's a reflection of the Biden in the household. Absolutely,
because I don't have a life.
Yes.
So where do you think where did Commander come from? Well, Joe Biden has that kind of sketchy brother. His name is James.
Yeah.
We're not talking Hunter, because I'm at the point now where I think the cocaine did belong to the dog. It's like the cocaine bear.
Absolutely.
I do.
Yes.
So,
absolutely.
all right. So Joe got Commander in December of 23. So I think it's Christmas, as a gift from his brother James. Now, James,
Okay.
James is never on the square. The records released cover of a fraction of his year and a half as a presidential pet.
That's his brother? No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, James. Well,
yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
They also have a cat named Willow. So November the 3rd, Dateline, a Secret Service official emails colleagues that Commander had bitten a uniformed officer twice.
Ooh.
On the upper right arm and on the thigh. Staff from the White House medical unit treated the officer and decided to have the individual taken to the hospital. A captain of the uniformed division emailed later that he had been advised that Commander was up to date with his vaccines.
Oh,
thank God, right?
Yeah, of course.
And a following day added details about the attacks, including that the officer who was bitten used a steel cart to protect himself from Commander.
Wow.
Commander was getting after it.
Yeah.
The officer later has placed several days of restrictive duty based on doctor's advice.
Jeez.
But the Bidens, I thought about this when I first saw the story. I thought it was a ha-ha, but I'm really talking about the dog. And it's like,
yeah. And
does the dog really reflect them? Yeah.
Yeah. And how has the dog been trained?
Yeah,
what are the commands for the dog? The other one is the dog just running around loose all the time? And that to me is interesting and a little bit different because especially that German Shepherd, it should be attached to one of the members of the family. And anybody that has had that dog that understands whoever that primary person is in the family, that dog will stay 5 to 10 feet from that person all the time and follow them. So, and my guess is, and again, maybe I'm just silly, but that it would be either Dr. Jill, because we have to refer to her that way.
Of course.
It's in the contract, and then also,
contractual.
Joe exactly, we have to. And so it's either got to be Joe or Dr. Jill. And so what was going on and why couldn't they take control of the dog? I don't know many dogs that if their primary caregiver is around, go and wander around a lot around the house. I mean, they will explore at times, but it's always coming back to that home base where their person is. And that person should have been able to control Commander. And if they can't, then you're a bad dog owner. You're a really, really bad dog owner if you cannot control that dog. And if you can't, the dog shouldn't be off the leash either. That's the other part that gets me. Is if Commander's just wandering around, that's an issue.
Commander is often seen being led around White House grounds by the chief groundskeeper.
That's stupid.
Well,
because again, I just...
No, I'm serious.
I know, but here's the thing that kills me is that you have got a dog. You've had this pet and you brought it into your life for a reason, for companionship and to be around. And you can't, and whoever is responsible for care, you can't be bothered to walk it. You can't be that's, I understand there are people that earn, I understand there are people out there that earn their living as dog walkers, but I still am allowed to throw shade at the owners saying you don't have enough time. You can't make the personal investment to do that for a dog. Come on.
It's bitten 10 people.
That's not good. And here's the thing.
Here's the other major bit people.
Yeah. And here's the thing with Command. Now let's say it's just, I don't know, average public Q citizen. Like let's say, slightly less average public Q citizen, Peter Boyles, or very average public Q citizen, Billy Thorpe. If we had a dog that bit people in the neighborhood 10 times, we would be getting sued. The dog would have been put down after the second or third bite, and we would be getting sued. We would be talking to our homeowners insurance about what the policy is, because we are about to have them write a giant check and our rates are going to go through the roof.
Someone once told me you are responsible for your dog's behavior, but not your cat's.
I like that. Next time someone tries to break in, I'm throwing a cat at them.
Cats walk by themselves.
We have two of those. Yeah, two of those.
Cats walk by themselves.
I can go double fisted. I can do 1 cat, 2 cat. We can,
But all right, so 303.
People,
yes.
I had to bite 10 people. That dog would have been euthanized. That dog, they would have been sued. How do you bite 10? That is a really bad reflection on the Bidens to bite 10 people. That's awful.
And there's no way, as my grandmother would say, on God's green earth, that Major, who went to Delaware, it's like a mob thing, like,
Oh, yeah.
Where'd Major? Hey, Delaware. But they said Major got sent to Delaware.
I'm sure he did. I'm sure he's getting to chase the lammies or the cows or whatever the hell it is they told him.
All right.
Yeah, I'm sure he did.
There's nobody on the phones. This may be one of those topics people say,
It could be.
303-696-1971. We got some bets here. We're like the NFL players. Number one, what are the overs and unders on whether or not Major the dog is still alive?
Yeah.
You got the under.
Yeah, I'm taking the under on that one.
If somebody else's dog, if you had a dog that bit 10 people, cops.
Yeah. Neighbors, kids in the neighborhood. Doesn't matter.
These are cops.
USPS, the US Postal Service people.
And if you've had 2 in a row dogs.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand every once in a while you get a bad seed.
And I'd love to hear from someone that has had a dog that has bit somebody and how that turned out. But more importantly, I'd love to hear from someone that was bitten by a dog. What happened to you?
Isn't there a dog here? I saw it on the news. Isn't there a dog here? It looks like a Springer Spaniel or something. They want to kill it.
Oh, yeah, because they bit somebody and they're trying to get one
bite.
We had a dog when we were little, and my younger brother has a slight scar on his face because our dog bit him in the face.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and it was not cool, and that was hard. We had to have a conversation about whether or not the dog was going to be put down. It was not a good thing. That was difficult, and how hard was that with him being in the house, knowing that this dog had turned on him, and he was a little boy.
All right, so what happened to the dog?
Dog stuck around for a while and was good, but he always had a kind of a arm's length relationship with the dog.
Dog never went to Delaware.
Yeah, no, never did. No, we talked about it though. We talked about whether the dog's gonna have to go visit the farm.
We got to do that. That's what they're gonna happen now. Well, whatever happened to that morning guy?
Yeah, exactly.
Went to Delaware.
Yeah, he went to Delaware. He's gonna go take care of Major.
Yes.
He needed someone to walk the dog.
He did that 5 a.m. gig. What happened to him?
Exactly.
Well, went to Delaware.
Yes.
Are we going to pause here?
We might as well.
Is that time? I don't follow the format. Good morning.
That's new.
Good morning. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. It is 27 minutes after the hour 6. It's going to be 94 for a high, 94 Thursday, 303-696-1971. Have you been or seen the film Oppenheimer? I was just blown away by how good it is. David Smith, Professor Smith from Baylor, will talk about it. And then sports betting. And there isn't anybody better than the hitman Joe Williams. And the league has suspended a Denver Bronco player for gambling. Hopefully Sandy will join us. Working for George again on Friday. There's so many. One thing, there's some cool text messaging. Insurance companies will cancel your homeowners if, for instance, I didn't know that, you have a pit bull in your home. Billy, did you know that? Wow. Are you talking about the dog or Hunter? I'm confused. Very good. Ding, 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 ding. All right. 303-696-1971. What does this say? The commander of the dog, but when you dig deep, you find out there was Major who went to Delaware. For real, what are the odds Major is still alive? 710 KNUS. I'm Peter Boyles. For George Brauchler, Billy Thorpe's got the con, and it's a Wednesday. And it's Peter Boyles for George Brauchler on a Wednesday morning. 94 will be the high, 63 tonight, and 94 Thursday, in and out of rain. And then on Friday, 95. We're here Friday morning filling in for George, and then Saturday morning for the show that we do at 9 a.m. Coming up, I saw the film Oppenheimer, and I don't know if you've seen the film or not. It's really a special movie. And Oppenheimer is this in the beginnings of the Cold War and how we all have viewed history. Oppenheimer really plays the role. But I think the people in the film, the guy who played Harry Truman, the rest of the stuff I thought was just fantastic. And I just thought it was just such a well done film. So I thought, well, we get Professor Smith on to talk about Oppenheimer and the decision to drop the atomic bomb, which has always been something that has been discussed by a group of historians they've dubbed themselves the atomic historians. And I really read these men. One guy's name I remember, I was telling my son over dinner, William Appleman Williams, and there was Joseph L. Purwitz, and they all came up with this: the bomb did not have to be dropped. And Harry did it because, number one, the Japanese weren't white. Had they had the bomb, they would have not dropped it on the Germans, which is nonsense. And had they had, the Japanese were not ready to surrender. So Harry Truman dropping the bomb saves lives. It's one of the great questions that you could ponder sitting around with your friends. If you were Truman in 45, would you have dropped the bomb? But it's more than that. It's, how many people were in the CPUSA and how brilliant these people were. And the guy who comes up and there's people that they're really almost like they're channeling. And I don't know how they did it, but there's a guy who plays Albert Einstein who got Albert Einstein down, and Fermi's in it, and Niels Bohr, and just all the people you've read about. And the only one that I thought was kind of miscast was Groves. And then there was one moment, and I want to get to this other stuff as well, but when Joseph Stalin, and I remember April the 12th, 1945, FDR dies, they tell Harry Truman has no idea about the Manhattan Project, about Oak Ridge, and about Trinity Site, about Alamogordo. They've kept him in the dark. He's like this sort of uneducated Missouri senator that he's an alternative. He's an accidental president. And they have to sit him down and have to tell him, we got this. And so he's going to Potsdam, and and remember, now by this time Churchill's gone. But he's going to Potsdam, he's going to meet Stalin. And where FDR thought we can make a world with Stalin, Harry Truman had no intentions. So and so they're pressuring, and all these are great books that all the years that I sat and read those books, and it all holds up. I mean, that's why the film, I was telling my son, we were talking about it, I said, man, this just holds up. And the only part about it was, if you read David McCullough's book on Truman, when Truman tells Joseph Stalin, we got this. And Stalin looks at him, and Harry says, it's as though he already knew. And they were trying to keep this a great secret. Of course he knew. And one of the things in the film is they do have Claus Fuchs. Claus Fuchs is Ethel Rosenberg's brother. And of course, we all know about the end of the Rosenbergs, but Claus passes, and he's British, by the way. And he shows up in the center circle. He's there very quickly. They also mentioned the Lincoln Brigade, but they just call it the brigade. And I told my son, we went out to get something to eat after and he's, like, as most people are, they have lives. But I said, she's talking about the Lincoln Brigade. What was that, Dad? Well, there was this group, and principally leftist. I mean, most of these people, remember, are leftist. And then, of course, when they go after, by 47, 48, 49, Oppenheimer's in his past associations with the CPUSA, and they yank his security clearance, which is really an interesting part of the film. And they have security hearings, and McCarthyism has begun, and it's a very terrible time. But the book and using the bomb, it was just it's so good. 303-696-1971. Let me read some of these. Billy or Peter, we had a Cocker Spaniel that bit a neighbor after that one bite. We put him down. The one-eyed man is king. Good morning. Major is like Obama's chef, dead. Ooh, that's rough. All right. Next one. Thinking about what you read, the dog bit one of the agents on the upper arm. That's not a target of convenience like a hand or an ankle. That dog was after it. That same dog bit the ankle and then turned and bit his leg. I guess bit him. Here's where I know it's like goofball stuff, but I think it carries with it a lot of heat. The Biden's dog has bitten Secret Service officers 10 times inside of 4 months. And the story breaks. But there was a dog before that. I didn't know this till last night. I'm reading and I went, wait a minute, Major the dog. And Major the dog was the former Biden dog. And Major was a biter. So this is the Biden's official say that Major went to Delaware. Not a chance. Oh, we go to Pete. Pete, you're on a radio show. Good morning. First guy out of the box. Thank you.
Hey, Pete. Great subject on the Oppenheimer film. I haven't seen it yet. But I've done a lot of reading and listened to a podcast by a guy named Dan Carlin about the Japanese during World War II. And it seemed like the Americans kind of came to the conclusion that the Japanese were going to make the decision on whether we dropped the bomb or not. And if you look at the history of the Japanese on how brutal they were during World War II, how they were training their civilians how to fight with bamboo sticks.
Oh, yeah.
It was a never die, we're gonna die, not surrender. I think that there's some legitimacy to that argument that the Japanese actually kind of made that decision for us.
No, absolutely. Harry Truman saved lives. When they dropped that bomb, there was a lot of predictions on Operation. One was called Coronet, and there was other ones, but to try and come on Kyushu and come onto the main island, and they didn't. There was the death toll was staggering.
1 million is some of the estimates.
And plus every man, woman, and child believed the emperor was God. And there was a woman's weapon called, why do I know these things? I don't, but it's called a naginata. And it's a long bamboo, but like you point out, it has like a side blade on the bottom. And they were training kids to put these backpacks on and run and roll underneath American armor and blow themselves up like sappers. And they were just not going to give, and it takes a second bomb. The movie doesn't. Yeah. The movie doesn't do that, but the reading does it. That Hiroshima wasn't enough.
Yeah, think about it too. They had 3 days, I believe, to sit on this and think about it.
They had 2 days. 2 days between the two.
Okay.
And then, according to LeMay, there was the traditional thought was, well, there was only 2 bombs. And apparently now there really was a third bomb, and it was in a place called Wendover, Utah. And they were gonna, and he made the phone call, get ready to send it. We'll use a third one, and the emperor breaks down, but there was civil war inside of the Imperial War College. There was civil war inside of the emperor's palace. All these young, crazy young officers who believed that this was the God and they couldn't do it. And Um, and then it gets down to, do you put Hirohito on trial, which you probably should have, but they were smart enough to know that there was a rise of communism inside of Japan. And go ahead. I'm sorry.
A lot of the stuff I read is that Hirohito really wasn't managing the war at all. The Japanese Navy and the Japanese Army actually had a rivalry with one another and did what they wanted when they wanted.
Now, that part of it's true, but he knew Pearl Harbor was happening. He was in on the planning. No, he knew. I mean, there's John Toland's book really takes down Hirohito, and he knew. He knew all of it. He knew what was taking place in China. It's, they talk about what does Tojo know? What does, what do those guys know? They're the operatives, but Hirohito knew.
It's a fascinating subject.
Oh, it's like my son said, we went to the 4:00 show. Wasn't hardly anybody in the theater, and it's a long movie. And I mean, I could have taken another hour of it, frankly, but when we left, walking out of the movie, there was a line to get in. So, I mean, I think it's still like a red hot film, but I'm so glad they've made it, because it really, they had this mention where one of the women that he marries, and her husband, just in passing, was killed with the brigade. And if you're not, and I was telling my son, we're eating, I said, if you weren't on to that, like, how many people will know what the Lincoln Brigade even was? Or for that matter, the Spanish Civil War.
Yeah, they were communists.
Yeah, but also the other side were fascists. And
I wasn't aware of that.
Pardon me?
I wasn't aware of that.
Oh, sure. I mean, the Franco side, they were fascists. They were in the language, they were the phalange.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant the Lincoln Brigade.
No, the Lincoln Brigade were communists. You're you're right. And that's,
well, they fought Franco's fascists.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's Hemingway's great book, For Whom the Bells Toll.
Yep.
And he's a communist. But it was, and they bring this up in these hearings, and this one guy's going after Oppenheimer's wife and saying, "Now, is there a difference between, Soviet communism and American communism?" Which was, we see that today. And how many of these young kids that profess themselves to be Marxists. And I thought it's really interesting that they'll call themselves Marxists, but they won't call themselves communists. And because I think about what that denotes. When you say communist, you're talking about Joe Stalin, you're talking about Mao, the Kims. So they use another term.
Well, that's the way they can distance themselves
That's
from the
right.
history.
Absolutely. But there's no question that Oppenheimer, although never a member of the party, certainly was a sympathizer. And his wife was a member. But a lot of those men and women were members of the party. And many people believe that, Oppenheimer was building the bomb because he was expecting it to be dropped on the Germans, and they never made it. Good call. Really good call.
Yeah, well, great subject.
Thank you, sir. Morning. All right, man. It's coming up. We'll have Professor on. We'll talk about it. If you've seen the film, Oppenheimer, that's great. 94 the high, 94 the next day, and 95 on Friday. Peter Boyles sitting in for the one and only George Brauchler. Billy Thorpe's got the con. Here we go. We got about a minute and a half until we pull away and then come back. We'll go to Baylor and Professor David Smith. The film Oppenheimer is devastatingly good. I'm talking to Crowley. He hadn't seen it yet, and I said it's a must. 94 will be the high, 94 again Thursday. Just big warm weekend coming. We're coming up on the 7th. And then this football betting, which I think is really interesting. The NFL, as was written, walks a very fine line on players betting. No one is better than Joe Williams. I love Joe Williams, and hopefully Sandy Clough. We'll put them on together. I'm Peter Boyles, of course, filling in for the Georgia's in the Army today. And the President Biden's dog, which a lot of people were sending us stuff, but that other dog, Major, that dog never made the cut. We come back, we'll go to Baylor, Oppenheimer. The film was, I think, so well done. There's a couple of moments and they go, I'm not so sure about that, but by and large, it's wonderful. 94, 94, 95. You stay here. It is a Wednesday, July 26th, 2023. Good morning, everyone. Wednesday, July the 26th. Peter Boyles for George Brauchler. I will also be working Friday morning for George, and then Saturday morning at 9 on our show. So on Wednesday morning, 26th July 2023, 94 will be the high today, 63 tonight, 94 Thursday, Friday 95, and the beat goes on. Coming up, there's sort of this, and it's interesting, a Denver Bronco has been taken off his job as obviously playing. The NFL walks this very fine line on players betting. We'll have Joe Williams on to talk about that. Hopefully, Sandy Clough. New column is up, 710knus.com, our website. Click on shows, click on me. You can read the column and see the shoot that we did with Billy Thorpe and all the producers. In the meantime, I on Monday afternoon, my son, as a gift, bought us tickets to see the film Oppenheimer. I think it's wonderful. Please say good morning and welcome back. One of the true greats from Baylor University, historian and Professor David Smith. Professor, good morning and thank you and welcome back.
Good morning, Peter. It's great to be back with you. How are you doing?
You know what? Really well.
That's great.
Yeah, I went through a little jolt here not too long ago, but man, all things considered.
Good. It's great to be with you on a weekday.
Oh man, and I have this great friend who's an artist and a motorcycle builder, and he's a jack of all trades. And we were having a conversation. He said, "Well, how many 80-year-old guys do radio shows and ride motorcycles?" And I said, I told him it was Bob Hope. That's any person I could come up with. Have you had a chance to see this film, Oppenheimer?
I haven't. I'm really looking forward to it, and I just haven't had a chance to yet.
How does Oppenheimer play out? I mean, my son, who is now taking this great interest in all of this, and I was that kid that when I got into undergrad, I was telling him I started reading like William Appleman Williams and Joseph Al Porowitz and all that school of atomic historians, and
right,
why did Harry drop the bomb? And it was really interesting. I think on another kind of a show, I would have like a question. I wrote this one down. If you were President Truman in 1945, would you have dropped the bomb?
Yeah, I mean that's the kind of question that you put to students, and they really wrestle with it, and that's one of those things that you can get in their heads with. But Oppenheimer himself was really conflicted. I mean, he was a theoretical physicist. He was a brilliant mathematician, and gradually he sort of understood the kind of power that he had unleashed on the world, or had a role in unleashing, and he had really sort of mixed feelings about it.
Yeah. And he's been this, and I was saying earlier on air, but particularly my son and I, there's mentions, and like I always like radio shows, and they're probably not the right way to say this, but they assume a level that you're with them. And Oppenheimer's wife, he was her third husband, and they're having this conversation, and she mentions her second or third husband, I forget, and he was killed with the brigade, and then they don't explain the brigade.
Oh, really?
No, it's like I was glad and thinking, and I told my son, we went out and had dinner, and I said, well, there was a thing called the Lincoln Brigade. Oh, really?
Yeah.
What? Yeah. So they just say he died with the brigade, or died fighting with the brigade.
Yeah, I mean, the anti-fascist cause in the Spanish Civil War was something that Oppenheimer felt really strongly about in the 30s. And he hosted fundraisers for the Republican cause in Spain. And, it raised suspicions about, his allegiances, of course. But yeah, he was a firm anti-fascist in Spain.
After the Second World War, they hunted down brigade members. Explain to our guest, the one and only Professor David Smith from Baylor, explain the brigade, the Lincoln Brigade, the aftermath of that, and the Spanish Civil War.
Well, the Spanish Civil War was this civil war in Spain between Republicans and I guess you could call them centralists or fascists, and it pulled in Europe. the story about the Spanish Civil War in the 30s was always that it was a dress rehearsal
Yes, it was.
for World War II,
Yeah.
and that the Italians and Hitler were supporting Franco and the
Mhm.
fascist cause, and the Soviet Union was supporting the Republicans, and American soldiers and Americans got caught up in it, right? And a lot of them went to fight in Spain on the Republican side against the fascists. And I mean, if you remember the movie Casablanca, you know, Rick
Sure.
fought on the side of the Republicans.
Yeah, the for whom the bell tolls.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful story that's really not known enough. I'm trying to work it more
Mhm.
into my classes. But yeah, it once the Cold War started, once the hunt for commies really got
Mhm.
underway in the United States, anybody who had supported the anti-fascist cause was suspect, and Oppenheimer was at the top of that list.
Yeah, and he was apparently, and I read that Prometheus book, and I've read some other stuff, and I've read a lot of Harry Truman stuff, but he was never a member of the party, but he was a sympathizer. Remember that jacket? He was a commie simp. What did that mean in like 1951?
Wow. Being a communist sympathizer in 1951 meant that you were disloyal to the United States
Yeah.
and wanted to see the Soviet Union win the Cold War and take over the world. There was no moderation. There was no middle ground in it. And the people who hunted down communists, like the House Un-American
Mhm.
Affairs Committee, were relentless in their badgering of people like Oppenheimer, like Hollywood people, Dalton
Mhm.
Trumbo.
So
To name names of people that they know, to cast their net wider and wider. So if you were accused of being a communist sympathizer, you were 90% on your way to being ostracized.
done. I mean, Dalton Trumbo, wins an Academy Award under another name.
Right? Isn't that a great story?
Yeah.
And just not too long ago, maybe like 1 or 2 years ago, I think Oppenheimer had his record retroactively cleansed, and his security clearance retroactively, posthumously restored.
It is amazing. I urge people to see the film. Professor David Smith of Baylor is here. The film is Oppenheimer, but it's about him, but it's not. We were trying to explain it to one another. It's about the beginnings of the Cold War. It's trying to end the Second World War,
Right.
and there's a moment with Harry Truman, and the Harry Truman character really has it down. They all do. I mean, they have, with the exception of Groves, playing Groves, they really do have this down.
Oh, good.
And there's this story that I've read before that they bring Oppenheimer in to meet Harry Truman, and he's trying to make a case that not to escalate. And Harry Truman David McCullough writes about it, that he goes, you only build it. And Harry said, I dropped it.
Yeah.
And then calls him a sissy.
Yeah. But Oppenheimer says he feels like he has blood on his hands,
Yes.
and Truman reacts poorly to that.
Yeah.
And Truman doesn't want to see him ever again.
No, he didn't.
He's still willing to appoint him committees and commissions and stuff, but Truman doesn't want any part of him personally.
Because how we think and how you think other moments, that there's a story about that. I just finished this other Cold War, the beginnings of the Cold War, FDR stuff. But when Joseph P. Kennedy is pulled back from being ambassador to the court of St. James, and he goes up into the valley and he talks to FDR. And when he leaves, FDR said, I never want to see him again.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. Man.
Yeah, Oppenheimer, I'm glad they make this part of the movie, apparently, from what you're saying. He was this brilliant guy, but he chased these ideas and then realized that, he's culpable in some regard for their use. And he was really, really conflicted. But I mean, that didn't make him a commie.
Oh, but a lot of those guys, I was telling my son that in the United States in the 30s, being a member of the party, like I used to read the Daily Worker. I did.
Yeah.
It was in the steel mill. I read the Worker, and then I remember the sports section in the headline. They always called it "The View from Left Field." Seriously, and the Worker.
I love it.
I loved it too. I thought, it was always but it was always about how, players were getting screwed over by owners and managers, and it was probably all true. Yeah. But he, in this moment, in any of those guys in the 30s, they really were, weren't they? And then I don't say they were Stalinists, but they were in the party, weren't they, or close to the party?
Yeah, they either were in the party, or they drifted in circles with party members, or they embraced radical ideas. It was the Depression. People were desperate for cures, and there's a lot of stuff we don't know about. We didn't know in the 30s about the Soviet Union. It comes out later, right?
Yeah.
But intellectuals coast to coast, it drifted in circles that were left leaning, and there's nothing wrong with that because of the situation the country was facing.
Even Dalton Trumbo, when he wrote Johnny Got His Gun, and I remember reading all that, and it was serialized in the Worker, and the moment that Stalin and von Ribbentrop with Georgy Malakoff, and they signed the deal,
right?
That was it. There were no more. The series or the serial Johnny Got His Gun stopped.
Wow, yeah, and that woke up a lot of leftists, George Orwell included.
Absolutely. Oh, greatest thing I've done reading. Two great things I've done reading. Why does H.G. Wells write The War of the Worlds?
Is this not a riddle? Is it?
No, it's a real thing. I was put down by it. I thought it was so insightful.
Tell me about it.
Well, remember, he's writing in the age of Victoria.
Yeah.
He's writing in the age of great imperialism. And this is an equivalent, a parody of sub-Saharan Africans when the British military comes.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that amazing?
And holy moly.
And they had all the technology that the Africans did not have. They killed them often as they could, as many as they wanted. And Wells was an anti-imperialist.
Sure.
And he wrote War of the Worlds about his country, Great Britain, particularly going into Africa, particularly going into sub-Saharan Africa. And
I never knew that.
No, I didn't either. In the time of Cecil Rhodes and what they did to African people, there used to be Hottentots, and they just murdered them all. And
Churchill wrote about it.
Yeah. Oh, was part of it.
It was part of it, right? In the Sudan. Gosh, wow! I'm gonna have to go back and reread it.
Oh
now.
Yeah, but that's what Wells was talking about. Is like these are the white British, the army and the bureaucrats, and coming, and the people stealing the raw materials. But that's War of the Worlds.
Yeah, and Orwell identified imperialism as one of the great evils of the 20th century, along with fascism and Stalinism.
Yep.
So that, looking at that, seeing imperialism through the eyes of H.G. Wells in the Victorian age, and then pulling it forward to the Spanish Civil War and fascism, and then pulling it forward into the 40s and 50s of Stalinism, it really takes us back to Oppenheimer's concerns about the peace of the world.
Yeah, as a reader, and you just get staggered. And again, this film Oppenheimer, our guest is the one and only Professor David Smith. But maybe it's like, I'm trying to think, we were actually sitting in the courtroom and watching it, instead of saying, well, I read this before, and I read that before, and I read this before, and I read that before, but watching how well they piece it together. And then in the end, when Oppenheimer's brother clearly is a communist. There's no question about that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And his life gets ruined. In the Manhattan Project. Why? I mean, who gives the green light? Tell me, I got to watch time here. Billy, are we okay on time? We're good? Break in a couple 5 minutes. Okay. Who decides to give the green light to the Manhattan Project?
Well, I mean, really, it's FDR. FDR decides to put the weight of the government behind scientific efforts in a unified way to discover the atomic bomb. And it becomes, instead of a bunch of different university labs around the country, with FDR's blessing, the government pulls it all together into one coherent program called the Manhattan Project, puts Oppenheimer in charge of the main lab. And it's FDR who understands the threat.
They write about the letter and they show a copy of it, the letter that Einstein writes.
Yeah, to FDR.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he warns him.
warning the president about the German efforts, right? And that was something that is right there throughout the entire Manhattan Project, was the fear that the Germans were ahead of them. And this notion that they've got to work hard, they've got to get things, they got to catch up. As we find out later, the Germans weren't. But the fear during the war was that the Germans were going to discover this first and use it. Yeah.
And they were certainly looking at it. And they pointed out in the film, and I've read it all before, a lot of this stuff was Joseph Goebbels, and they called it Jew science.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And because, all those guys happen to be Jewish. Not all of them, but most of them.
Well, yeah, a lot of them. And they started fleeing the country in the 30s.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the movie mentions this at all, but Oppenheimer helped contribute money to get Jewish scientists out of Germany in the 30s.
Yeah. I'm being told to take a break. When we come back, the decision to actually do it. And and you're right about this meeting that goes badly. Oppenheimer said he felt he had blood on his hands, and the remark really makes Truman and puts an end to the meeting. And Truman told, I think it was Dean Acheson, he said, I don't want to see that. In the film, they said sissy, but according to, and it wasn't Harry, but according to David McCullough, he son of a bitched him. And
that doesn't sound like Truman to say sissy.
Yeah, but in the film, they said sissy, and David McCullough said other words for.
Exactly. That's about the Truman I know.
Me too. Hang on, please. The one and only, and he is the one and only, David Smith is here. Joe Williams coming up. Maybe Sandy be with him. 710 KNUS. I'm Peter Boyles for the George Brauchler is off. 94 the high. Stay here. Good morning, everyone. It's a Wednesday morning. Peter Boyles in for the one and only George Brauchler. 94 will be the high today, 63 tonight, 94 again tomorrow. Got rain coming in and out, and that's all good stuff. Joe Williams, hopefully Sandy Clough straight ahead. 710 KNUS, the new column is up, the one I wrote about what happened to me. And you go to 710 KNUS, our website, click on shows, click on me, and the column is there. Without further ado, over time, he truly is, I mean, one of the great guests from Baylor University, the one and only David Smith. Now, on Monday, my son, as a gift, took me to see this movie, Oppenheimer. It's that good. I mean, it's as good as anything I've seen because it ties into so much. And this creating the atomic bomb, the Manhattan Project, and then Trinity, but then the decision to drop the atomic bomb. Talk about Harry Truman. I said earlier, and one of the guys on the job came in and said they did not know that. Harry Truman did not know the bomb was being developed, did he?
Right. Truman was completely in the dark. You know, he had only been FDR's vice president since January of 45. And then FDR died in April of 45, and Truman didn't know anything. I mean, that's a testament to how successful the secrecy was. But Truman was not brought into the conversations. He wasn't briefed on the existence of this thing until he was president, and then he understood that this had been built throughout the entire course of the war to use if it works. And those things at that, and the determination, you know, to be a straight shooter, no pun intended, but you know, not to be, you know, shifty like he thought FDR was. He wanted to be a straight shooter. So the decision to drop the bomb was sort of an expression of his personality.
They make a point in the film, and I've read it, so I mean, do with that as you may, but that when Harry was going to Potsdam to see Stalin,
yes,
he wanted to know whether the bomb worked.
Yes.
And so they have to rush ahead and do the first shoot. And McCullough writes about this extensively, that he got a telegram, and I was telling my son, you know, the baby born mother fine, or words to that effect. And that's when he knew the bomb worked.
Right.
And so he meets Stalin and he tells him about it. Then, you know, like, and he writes in his own memoir, he said it was as though Joe knew. Well, Joe knew, right?
Joe did know.
Joe did know. And so there's, in the film, as a quick introduction, here's Claus Fuchs. And he's the British guy. He comes in with this contingent of British scientists, and they go to Alamogordo. And I think, if I remember correctly, Claus Fuchs is he the brother of Ethel Rosenberg, or he's somehow related to the Rosenbergs?
Oh yeah, that's right.
And he passes on. He's one of the ways that Joe gets the bomb. Joe doesn't blow their first bomb till 49.
Right.
But so they have Claus Fuchs. He's in the film, and like, I'm sitting in the theater. I want to, you know, like, you want to talk? You want to go? Yeah, that's Claus Fuchs, you know, and Oppenheimer's clearly in the dark. He doesn't know who Claus Fuchs is, but he's stealing the secrets. So what was the arguments against dropping the bomb?
The arguments against dropping the bomb were along the lines that it would cause incredible civilian death. They didn't even really know how much it would cause, and they didn't think it was necessary. They thought that a blockade and the Soviet entry into the war would convince Japan to surrender, and Truman thought that was completely wrong. He thought that the Japanese would never surrender, and Truman had been given, you know, most of the arguments against the bomb came from humanitarian reasons, from people who understood how destructive it could be. But Truman had been given briefings since April about the inevitability of a Japanese invasion of Japan, the home island. and how bad it was going to be. His military advisors, his army advisors kept telling him, you got to prepare the American people. This is going to be the worst part of the war when we come into Japan. And then for Truman, once he understood that the bomb worked, that invasion is off the table.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to worry about that anymore. And he doesn't have to depend on the Soviets anymore, right? Because one of the things that FDR had gotten out of Stalin at Yalta was a promise that after Germany's defeated, the Soviet Union will help defeat Japan. And Truman doesn't want to be beholden to Stalin. And once he realizes the bomb works, suddenly he thinks, I don't need Stalin's help anymore, and I don't have to acquiesce in the domination of Poland, in Eastern Europe, and I can be more assertive. And people at Potsdam remarked that Truman got a whole lot more assertive after he read whatever that telegram said. Yeah.
No, I've read that stuff, and this is why the left historians blame Harry Truman for the beginning of the Cold War.
Right. Yeah. There was a whole rash of books that came out in the 70s and I guess the early 80s that sort of retold the story of the beginning of the Cold War. And Truman's sort of, quote, belligerence, it gets a lot of the blame for it.
And they have these theories, and it's been too many years, but one is the Japanese weren't white. And
to justify the dropping of the bomb.
You could use the bomb. Yeah. And that that they would have not done it to the, and I believe that they probably could have used it or would have used it on the Germans, except the bomb wasn't ready. And
right, exactly. And Oppenheimer himself said, "I wish this had been ready to use against Germany,"
because of the German-Jewish thing. Sure,
right.
And they knew, and Oppenheimer was, ethnically and culturally a Jew.
Yeah,
and so they said,
I believe Truman's decision was pretty straightforward.
Oh yeah,
he had this weapon. It was work. It could bring the end of the war. It would save American lives. That was all it took for Truman.
And they even talked about it took two of them, and with a third one on the way. And they still there was no giving them. And so, but one of the arguments that the left historians make in the 50s and 60s are, would they have done it to non-white people, to white people? And I remember the first time I read that, and then they said the third reason that Harry Truman drops the bomb is to show Joseph Stalin, number one, we got it. Number two, we are willing to use it.
Yeah, I've heard that too. I've read those books that say the first one was dropped for Japan, the second one was dropped for the Soviet Union.
Yes. And
because the Soviet Union marched into Manchuria between the two bombs. And by this point, right, this is August, they know what the Soviet Union is doing in Eastern Europe. And they don't want to see Asia divided like Eastern Europe was. So, I mean, the notion that you drop the second bomb to try to intimidate the Soviet Union is not as far-fetched as some of the other things.
And I find, some agreement that although, John Toland's stuff about inside the castle and the military headquarters and the revolutions are taking place and young Japanese fanatical officers and all this stuff. And you could have dropped 10 of them.
Yeah, they weren't going to surrender.
They weren't giving it up. And finally, and that's the other part we were talking about earlier with a caller, that I'm not a huge Douglas MacArthur fan, but he was smart enough to keep Hirohito on the throne. And Hirohito probably should have been tried for war crimes because he was in on it. He knew what the boys were doing.
He acquiesced at least. Yeah. But then again, he was the one that stepped in and said, we have to surrender.
Yes.
And the emperor breaking the silence and saying we have to surrender was really what did it.
And no one else would have.
Yeah, no one else would have. No one else could have. And the military leadership, like you said, they weren't going to surrender.
So Harry Truman's job was to decide how to end the Second World War. And the thought of invading, there was no way of even counting a casualty. I mean, how many casualties there would have been. People
Yeah,
thought
it horrified him.
people thought the war might have stretched into 1948.
Yep.
And that quickly the war's over.
Yeah.
No, I think, I mean, I'm like this Truman fan. Truman, did the right thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think that Truman was constrained by what he knew and what he was up against and what he had faced and what he knew the war would be like if it continued. And he made the only decision that he felt that an American president could make.
Yeah. And then what about final overview of Oppenheimer? Your thoughts of Oppenheimer?
The person?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm glad he was on the side of the U.S. I'm glad. I'm glad he's interesting. He's such a brilliant scientist, and there's an element of tragedy. I don't know if the movie brings this up, but there's a tragic element in his story.
Absolutely.
That just he's got it all in a way, and then he reaches this peak of achievement in shepherding this enormous engineering project to fruition, and then the next thing he's doing is he's getting his security clearance stripped and coming before the House Un-American Affairs Committee, and the FBI has a file on him. It's just a tragedy.
Talk about the Red Scare.
Oh gosh, do we have time?
Yeah, no.
How
about this? Let me break, and we'll come back and wrap it on the Red Scare. All right, we'll do that.
Yeah,
all right.
Great.
The one and only David Smith, Peter Boyles, 710 KNUS. The film is Oppenheimer. Stay right here. Peter Boyles in for the man, 710 KNUS. Good morning, everybody. It is a Wednesday, the 26th of July, 2023. Another hot day. I saw him face to face the other day at Alpine. He's my favorite. Gabe is here talking about Alpine planning. Hey, my boy, it's good to see you or hear you again. Good morning.
Great to see with you again in this forum, Mr.
Yeah.
Boyles. How are you doing this morning?
You know what? I'm doing great. I met with Brian and everybody to go over a bunch of where am I, how do I look, and what's it look like, and it's all good. But Alpine planning, this comprehensive, maybe that's the word I'm looking for, but boy, they're committed to their customers, and you guys are the best, truly. I mean, I'm away from everyday work now, and so everybody worries about dough, and you guys just did a hell of a job.
Well, it was so great to. That was one of the longest chats I've had with a client in a long time, sir. But
yeah.
This morning is a big day, actually, Pete. And I know you got a great guest on, so I want to let you get back to that. But big day for the markets. We currently have them flat. The Dow's actually up 18. S&P is down 4, and the NASDAQ is down 16. So essentially flat on the markets. The Dow is on a 12-day win streak, Pete, one of the longest in many years. But I think what most participants are looking at today is the Fed decision. I think there's a market consensus that there is going to be another quarter rate hike here. But I think what people are really going to be paying attention to is what the rhetoric on what they're going to do for the remainder of the year, most likely in September and November. So that's what's going on. We're still rolling through earnings season. We have Chipotle and Meta, the Facebook parent company, reporting today. But other than that, we're just strapping in our seatbelt and working with clients just like we did with you the other week, sir.
There's no one better. Call them today at 303-843-0918. 303-843-0918. Ask for Gabe, ask for Brian, ask for Amy. It doesn't matter. They're just that good. Thanks, son. I'm sure I'll see you next week. Thank you very much.
All right. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Securities and investment advisory services offered through Woodbury Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA SIPC and registered investment advisor. Alpine Planning Group and Woodbury Financial Services, Inc. are not affiliated entities. 14 West Dry Creek Circle, Littleton, Colorado, 80120.
All right, coming up on time, couple minutes left. Kind enough to be with us from Baylor University. He's become such a part of our show. Professor David Smith. On Tuesday, my son took me to see this film, Oppenheimer. I can't tell you how good it is. And it holds historically accurate, which is how many times, Professor, do you think you go to see a film about some part of history that you are pretty good at, and that film isn't even close? It's like, wait a minute.
It's disappointing, you know. Here's a chance to see what we love up on the screen, and they don't tell the story truthfully. So I'm really happy to hear you saying that it's good.
And the only moments I could find, and I read something on the internet that apparently there's this moment where they're all waving flags because the bomb has worked or because they dropped it on the Japanese, and they're waving flags that have 50 stars.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Oh, whoops. There was only 48 states, but where are you going to, and the other one was the Harry Truman stuff and what Harry said, and then Harry and Stalin. I wish they'd have shown Stalin. They didn't do that, but it really focuses. But then that leads me to my final question. When UAC hits and McCarthyism hits, it's really called the second Red Scare, because we had a Red Scare, the Palmer raids and everything. So,
right.
What was the Red Scare? That Red Scare about?
The Red Scare was a product of the Cold War. It was a product of fear and the conviction that Americans, your fellow Americans, were disloyal for some reason, and that they were turning on the country just because they had ideas that were different from yours, that lined up with the Soviet Union. There was this conflation of, if you're a leftist, then you must want to overthrow the country because the Soviet Union is at war with us. And it was just a hysteria, and it became a crusade against thought. You couldn't. There were certain ideas that you couldn't hold, or you'd be persecuted for them. It was terrible.
Are you seeing that again?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I worry about it. To be honest
I
with
do
you, I
too.
do.
I do.
I worry about it a lot.
Yeah.
That if you're an academic, and if you're a librarian,
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna be called into question for just what you think.
Yeah.
And it's awful for people who aren't, who are independent thinkers.
My son and I were talking about it at dinner, and he's becoming real aware of all this history, this stuff. Even now he wants to read these things. And I said and they make the case, and the case has been made, where they take Thomas Mann, they take Freud, and they take, all the great German literary thinkers, and they burn them.
Mm-hmm.
Or call it Jew science.
Yeah.
And it puts them all behind the 8 ball. And it's like, for what reason? I never quite understood that.
I don't understand the book burners and the book banners and things like that. It's fear, and if you're subjected to that from someone else, it's awful, because you don't even know what you should think anymore.
We leave it on that. No, that's true. I mean, it really is. I mean, when it gets where people are afraid to speak or afraid to actually think, what line have we now crossed?
Right, exactly.
Wow. But you're good? All's well in the world?
Yeah, all is well in the world. I'm just wrapping up my summer.
Yeah. What are you going to teach this fall?
I'm teaching an introduction to military history again, which I
Wow.
do every fall. It's a great class. I'm doing a upper division U.S. since 1920 that I haven't done in about 15 years.
Woo.
I'm really excited about it.
See,
I'm still going back and forth on picking my books. I'm really excited, and then a couple of survey courses that I still love to teach.
Thank you so much for this morning. It meant a lot.
Oh, Peter, anytime, man, anytime.
Well, you're kind. Professor David
I love you,
Smith,
man.
Baylor University, thank you. On the other side, it's open lines. And then there's this brewing scandal in the NFL, and your Denver Broncos have had to let this guy, well, I don't know if they've let him go. They suspended him, for a year, is that what it is, for gambling. And also then Joe Biden's dog Commander has bitten Secret Service agents 10 times. But what we found out is that they had this other dog, Major, and Major bit a bunch of people. And so I'm getting a lot of emailing from people who really understand dogs. And they're going, dogs learn from their, quote, owners. But then there's this funny line that somebody said they want proof of life on this. Commander, I'll just read it briefly. Commander is the second of the Bidens dogs to behave aggressively. Major went to find a good home in Delaware. Billy and I both believe Major went to ride Space Mountain. So coming back, open lines, and then the guys will join us. 303-696-1971. Good morning, everybody. Wednesday morning, July the 26th, 2023. I'm Peter Boyles, working for George Brauchler. I'll be doing the same thing on Friday. George will be back in action. And then we got our Saturday morning show at 9 o'clock, all here on Radio Free Denver, 710 KNUS. The column about what I went through because people were asking. So the column is up. You go to 710 KNUS and click on shows, click on me, and you'll see the producer's video from the shoot with Billy and everybody. And then also the column about what I went through. So there is that. This morning we began open lines talking about the Biden's dog. And then my son took me to see the film Oppenheimer. And it's absolutely wonderful. And so we had David Smith on from Baylor talking about the beginnings, the end of the First World War, the ending of the Second World War, beginnings of what was called the Cold War, using the atomic bomb, the Red Scares, and Robert Oppenheimer. So if you have some thoughts, if you've seen the film, jump in. Also, somebody's asked me, okay, what are you reading? I just finished, this is text message, and you read so much. I got nothing else to do, and this has been a great time to do so. I just finished Getting Gaudy, and it is as good. And it's if you're an attorney, and the prosecutors, the government prosecutors, on how they really, the inside on how they got John Gotti. And of course, with great use from Sammy Gravano, Sammy the Bull. Now, the Gravano's got his own television show or on YouTube show, and I find myself drawn to it. I watch it. So anyhow, about in the end with John Gotti. And then there's a book called Starkweather. And a friend of mine wrote the book. And I have been talking with half a dozen people, Uncle Dan and the guys that grew up in Nebraska, Daryl Luby. And it's about Charlie Starkweather. Show of hands, how many people remember Charles Starkweather? And he's the model for what's Badlands, I think, is the film. And he may have been the model for, but one of the things that gets pointed out, and it's McLean's book, and we're going to try and get him in here on Friday, is that there's this one picture of Charlie Starkweather. And he's got like these open lips with a cigarette hanging, sort of hanging down. James Dean saw that picture and knocked off Charlie Starkweather when he played Jim Stark. Remember, where was he, Jim Stark? Rebel Without a Cause. And that letting the cigarette sort of hang down and having that smirk. Charlie Starkweather. And so as they point, the book is just entitled Starkweather. And the pointing out is that we never had these terms before: serial killer, spree killer. Those were not terms that were in the lexicon, were in the language. And after Charlie Starkweather and Cheryl, and she was a kid. She was 14. He was 19. He was little. I was surprised. I always thought of Starkweather or but talking to friends who grew up in Nebraska, guys who are old guys like us, how their moms were worried. Their moms and dads were worried because no one knew where Charlie was, but he was killing people. And he had been, I don't even know how you describe it, but how many people remember Charlie Starkweather and what he set off? He got, I don't think it's, they put him in a chair. He got the chair, and she did not, but she was a kid. She's 14 years old. And Starkweather starts, the death highway. He starts doing the roads. So anyhow, it's the book I'm reading now. And I just really, this Getting Gaudy book was really good about how, and then remember Diane Jackalone, the first woman that prosecuted John Gotti when they went in and and how they treated her. She's an ethnic Italian woman attorney, and how organized crime, principally Italian Sicilian men, they treated her horribly, Diane Jackalone. And Gotti beat that one. Well, because Sammy Gravano tells him, we had that rigged. We had that jury fixed. All these years go by. And Sammy Gravano, they take him. I didn't realize this. They took him to the FBI Academy at Quantico. That's where they kept him. And they would bring him in and out of New York. And he said, well, they said, oh, yeah, because we lost that first trial. I said, Sammy said, you didn't lose it. I fixed it. So he talked about the juror that he had fixed, and they named it the juror. And they said he gave him $60,000 to throw it. So the book kind of ends where this guy's living, by himself. Knock on the door, opens it up. There's the feds. You rigged a jury. You threw a jury. They chained him up, and he did time for going, for throwing the trial for John Gotti. So they had Gotti so many different times, but in the end, it isn't what it is. But so Diane Jackalone, what do you know, ends up, she meets a guy who's Dutch, and she now lives in Europe. She's married and has kids. And so he gets a phone call when Gleason they get John Gotti. And they said long distance phone call, and he picks it up, and it's Diane Jackalone, and she's thanking him so much. And then he tells her the jury was rigged. We had it won, and they fixed the jury. So I just finished that, but I am reading, this is a very powerful book, Starkweather. So if we can pull that off, that'd be great to do it by Friday. All right. 303-696-1971. Good morning. Did you see Oppenheimer? And get your thoughts about that. Also, and I get the big boot out of it, the Biden's dog, and then also Giuliani conceding that he made false statements about the Georgia 2020 election workers who were suing him over this baseless claim of fraud that he had made against them. Because they talk a lot about, the feds talk a lot about rolling. They call it rolling or flipping. I got a real sneaking suspicion that Rudolph Giuliani's going to roll. He's going to flip. And when he does, somebody's got a bad problem. I want to read this too. Ethel Rosenberg's brother, and I know this is true. I screwed up. Ethel Rosenberg's brother was David Greenglass. He was also a spy at Los Alamos and testified against his sister. Fuchs was the German physicist. He was the spy, not related to the Rosenbergs. Thank you, because I know that's correct. All right, let's go to Ralph. Ralph, you're on a radio show. Good morning, and thank you.
Yeah, Pete, on Oppenheimer, did they have that interaction between Oppenheimer and Einstein?
Yes.
And now, correct me if I'm wrong, was Einstein in the United States during World War II?
Yes, he was at Princeton.
Yeah, that's what I thought, because after he left Germany, he spent a year in England, then came over here. Did the people in the Manhattan Project ask Einstein to help him, and he said no?
Yeah, he always said no, I thought, because he was afraid, and I've read it in that lengthy book about Einstein. He was afraid it wasn't what was going to happen at the end of the second, it was what was going to happen next.
Yeah, so I heard in that scene that when Oppenheimer walks away, he calls him a Yiddish name meaning "you're a fool."
Now, I have never seen nor heard that before, because they do have this meeting, and it's important. And in the end, they explain what the two of them said to one another. But I mean, the most significant thing is how many of these men and some women are all European Jews.
Yeah. And I mean, Einstein, 99% of the people living in the United States at that time didn't know what the hell was going on, did they? I mean, really,
did you ever read those books about him? He suddenly, and there's this theory in history that somebody comes along and they're game changers. They Pablo Picasso, Thomas Jefferson, Galileo,
Yes.
Thomas Jefferson, that they suddenly Einstein, it becomes, the notion of what physics is about gets chucked out the window because quantum physics, and there's Albert Einstein, and he changes everything. Picasso, I think, and they actually have a moment in the film where Oppenheimer sees, and I was trying to impart this stuff to my son, where he sees a Picasso. He sees a Picasso painting. And I said, Picasso just overwhelmed the art world when he started.
Yeah.
Um,
Michelangelo.
Same thing. There are these guys that just come along. And oftentimes they are not classically educated. They're not, like I have this theory that, and there were the hair bands, all this big hair. And then this is a little, after us, but then all of a sudden comes Nirvana. And all the hair bands, they often Elvis Presley or the Beatles. Yeah. It just changes. And
I agree. I haven't seen Oppenheimer yet. I want to.
Oh, please see it.
Yeah, I like space. I like physics and these type movies.
Oh man, and it's like I didn't know what. I don't think I've tried to sell a movie on the air. I don't think that, but this one. And my son said, "Dad, this is like the stuff you read and talk about." And he took me, and we caught it. When we caught the 4:00 show, there was very few people in the theater, but when we walked out, there was a line to get in. So we caught it right. But they have Einstein. They have a Fermi character. They have, if you don't know the players, you need a scorecard, because that kind of a thing. But the Truman guys, the guy who plays Truman's good. The guy who plays Oppenheimer is incredible.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah, he really. So especially, like I said, an old geek like you, like the film's really long.
That's what I heard. 3 hours.
Yeah, my son's great advice. Hey, Dad, go to the bathroom. It's a 3-hour film. But okay, we're at the point now. Yeah, we're at the point now. He talks that way to me. Yeah.
I appreciate you talking about him, bringing it up, and the characters. And having that professor on, that was a great interview. I love hearing when you talk to him.
Yeah, I mean, those guys are, I don't know, if you read all about them and you feel like you know them, I mean, you feel like you've been around them, and then you see it captured so well. The only other film that the book and the movie were the same is To Kill a Mockingbird.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't find anything in To Kill a Mockingbird, Gregory Peck as Atticus Finch. That was the book.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise, excuse me.
They make a play about that. Didn't it come to Denver?
Yeah, and I went and saw it. Actually, Brother Jeff, Brother Jeff's daughter, and we went, and it's spectacular. I mean, it's emotional. But that film with Gregory Peck, and I had read the book, and I was working as a kid and went to see that. I remember going to see it all by myself because, like the kind of guys I was hanging out with, it wasn't their kind of movie. But seriously, and it was like, damn, that's the book, Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks, Ralph. Be safe.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right, we go to Dwayne. Hey, Dwayne, you're on the radio show, 710 KNUS, 20 minutes after 8. All the guys coming up at 9 o'clock. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Always glad to have you on. As the one-eyed man is king.
And
a couple. So, besides what went on with Oppenheimer, don't forget Paul Tibbets and Tom.
Yeah, I interviewed Tom, Paul Tibbets. Did a radio show with him.
And the stresses that went on. I mean, it wasn't just the guys in the plane; it was the entire Air Force base there at the time. They all had to deal with what they did. because it was all, I mean, you had relit the Roman candle.
According to Tibbets, and I'm one of the, nobody was affected by it. There were, I remember as a kid when I was always around my beer drinking uncles, and they had this theory that everybody that had been on the gay, went to jail or mental institutions or all this kind of stuff. So I knew two people. One guy I got to know real well, and Tibbets. And I asked Tibbets. Tibbets retired as a general. He made general, and I asked Tibbets that story. He said, "Oh no," he said one of the guys got jammed up in a bar fight. Was a drinker. Was in a bar fight and went to jail for that night. But I mean, remember, this is the important part. I was talking to my son about it. Pearl Harbor had happened. The Japanese had done so many horrible things that no one felt bad. Oppenheimer, gets, he says he has blood on his hands, and Harry Truman said, "Hey, you just made it. I dropped it."
Well, that's very true.
Yeah. And it's so easy to sit here in 2023 and pass judgment. They knew how many young Americans are going to die if you're going to take these.
Had you firebombed Tokyo, it would have been absolutely awful. Unfortunately, all the information I got was from 80s, so I may have to delve a little bit deeper. But I knew General Tibbets was really.
Oh, and it was called Operation Cornet, and I think Cornet was the invasion of Honshu, and I don't know the name of it, but they were going to go ashore, and they thought they had been in Okinawa, and they had lost so many people in Okinawa, and the closer they got to the main islands, the more intense the Japanese became. And
when you've got nothing to lose.
Well. But it was more than that. It was the religion,
Well, that's what I'm saying. They didn't know quit.
Oh.
So, when you're fighting an enemy that doesn't have an idea of quit or surrender, and self-sacrifice is everything, that becomes the thing where it's like, you can't beat those people.
And you got to learn that quick. And so
Afghanistan taught that to us, didn't it?
Southeast Asia taught that.
Oh, yes.
But they knew, Harry Truman, who's not a sophisticated guy, he's doesn't have a college education, but he's got a lot of common sense, and all the inputs to Harry Truman, Mr. President, because they're not going to give. So Harry gives the green light.
Yeah. The one thing you had to wonder in the movie, which I found fascinating, was when Matt Damon, as his character goes, there's a small chance that it might do what?
Yeah.
Light up the entire world.
When I was in school and reading all, I was so enamored by this stuff. They actually had a meeting. And the question was, what if this hits the ground and doesn't go off? I swear you can read the notes from the meeting.
Oh, yeah.
And the idea was that how long would it take before the Japanese could figure out what it was and bring it back to San Francisco? That's true story. And
oh, yes.
And it was an aerial burst bomb. It blew up in the air and never hit the ground. They had it rigged, so it allegedly blew down, but they had great conversations about all of this.
There was a lot of soul searching and a lot of designs and everything. What I found fascinating was, you think it was like it had 40, 50 pounds of stuff inside, and it did not have very much in there.
Yeah, no, it didn't.
So,
and they didn't arm it till it was in the air. There's a very brave Navy guy that crawled back in there and armed it after they got it in the air. And when I had talked to Tibbets, there was this big movement but it's the museum in D.C. and they had the gay, and they were going to bring the gay and put the gay in there, and there was this big anti-war, anti-bomb people, and they did not want the gay in the museum. And Tibbets,
right, Patterson?
No, I think in Washington D.C.
Oh, in the Smithsonian, that didn't surprise me. They did,
and they didn't want it. And I forget how old I was. I figured Tibbetts was probably as old as I am now. And we talked at great length, and there was a movie made about it. But an idea, he and his wife, that didn't work out. He and the missus. But he said, "Hey, these are combat crazy pilots. What did you think you were going to get especially after something like this?" But he was a really remarkable interview. He was very brilliant, very bright guy, and he said, "I don't feel bad about anything."
Okay. Well, like I say, the things I read were in the 80s, and I may have to revisit because of all the things. The thing is also was that, the generation of that caliber certainly was a lot more black and white without 15,000 shades of gray like now.
Those were the new historians that came along, and the new schools, as they were called. And I'm citing them, but there was William Appleman Williams, who was at the University of Wisconsin, a guy named Al Porwitz. And I read them. They influenced me in undergrad about, the bomb and everything. And then as I got older, read other people, and then came my own decision that was the smart thing Harry Truman did. And it ended the war. We'll talk. Thank you, man. All right. Want to break?
Always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Oh, love you, man. Thanks. All right, Billy. 94 will be the high, 63 coming up. This idea of betting. And the Denver Broncos suspended for a year a player for gambling violations. Hopefully, Sandy will join Dave will join the Hitman, but the Hitman's scheduled. The one, the only, Joe Williams. Stay here, 710 KNUS. Good morning, everyone. On a Wednesday, 94 will be the high, 94 tomorrow on Thursday. Sandy Clough will be here. Sandy and Joe Williams coming up at the top of the hour. 710 KNUS Denver's Talk Station. I'm Peter Boyles filling in for George, and I'll be back here on Friday. And, of course, our Saturday show as well. And there's a new mob book out that we just got booked for the Saturday show. We chose this life. The new column I wrote about was sort of what went through is up. Go to 710 KNUS. It's from the Cherry Creek Chronicle, Chuck and Julie, 710 KNUS. And you click on shows, click on me, click on the column, and there it is. All right, we go to Lynn. Lynn, you waited. Good morning. You're on the radio show, and thank you.
Good morning, Peter. Peter, my real name is Paige Lewis, and you and I have known each other for a long time.
Paige Lewis?
Yes.
What are you doing now?
Well, I'm still hanging in there, Peter, and I would love to have a chat with you, but I've never been able to connect with you. But I wanted to chime in today because my mother's brother had an illustrious career, including the Manhattan Project.
Wow.
And I'm sitting here with his obituary, and I thought I would just read you. I'm trying to underline parts of it that I think you might find interesting. He was a PhD in biological chemistry. I have his handwritten acceptance to Harvard when he was 16. He had a 40-year career as a scientist at Corning, Inc. He was the first manager of the Corning Electronics Research and Development Laboratory.
Wow.
He was a technical honorary societies, including American Chemical Society, Phi Beta Kappa.
Can I get you?
Sigma Chi,
You're just reading.
IRE.
Yeah, we don't need to read all that, but he must have been. It must
Well,
have.
he was the head of the research laboratory at Corning for the late Admiral Rickenbauer of the U.S. Navy to help direct the development of the first U.S. nuclear submarine.
He was Jimmy Carter's.
He was a member of the committee of scientists that were chosen to work on the Manhattan Project under the direction of Franklin Roosevelt. He was selected by the U.S. Department of Energy Senior Technological Board.
You don't have to do that. I mean, it's okay. It's just.
But he was world famous, and the solidification of high-level nuclear waste, and he helped the British develop their first radar system during World War II. So I can't wait to see Oppenheimer.
Oh, see that film. You really should. You should see that film.
I absolutely should. And you have my phone number. I know management over at iHeart has my phone number, and I would truly like to have a conversation with you.
Promise. Thank you. I will.
Okay.
303-696-1971. Good morning, everybody. The other topic, and a sort of tongue-in-cheek, but it's really not, is Joe Biden's dog. And I saw this last night, and I thought, bring it to the show, because there's a justice system in this country. I don't think there's any question of caste systems and justice systems, and anybody thinks there isn't is a fool. But Joe Biden's mutt. And not only the first dog, but when I'm reading, I found out there's a second dog. It's Major, the dog Major. So Commander is the dog now that has bitten, the best of what the newsmobiles are saying. Joe Biden's dog is named Commander. There's something wrong. You start naming dogs like Major and Commander and Killer, and they're dogs, man. But yeah, I think they're connected to other parts of your body. But Commander bit or otherwise attacked Secret Service personnel at least 10 times between October and January, including one incident that required hospital visits by injured law enforcement officers, Biden cops. Just think if you had your dog, Bruno, and Bruno bit a cop. Not one cop, but 10 cops. Suppose Fluffy bit 10 cops. Now, it goes on that the Bidens, this is their second German Shepherd, and there was Major. And this is the part, there's no there's no way I believe this. Commander is the second of Biden's dogs to behave aggressively, including biting Secret Service personnel and White House staff. Now, this is the part I'm asking you if you believe. They eventually sent the dog, a German Shepherd named Major, to live with friends in Delaware after those incidences. No way. He took the gas pipe. The White House and the Secret Service are trying to play it down, but the Bidens, they bought another German Shepherd to the executive mansion, and why the attacks continued. I don't know. We'll go to Kathleen. You're on a radio show. Good morning and thank you.
Good morning. Dogs aren't born mean.
No.
They learn it, and I think all of the children, small children who were bitten by dogs, were bitten at a time when no adults were around. You can't leave a small child with a dog alone, because children do things like poke their fingers in eyes and ears, and they try to pull ears. And
sure. Oh,
you know, like the dogs will put up with it for a while, and the kid just won't stop. So the dog warns him, and the kid laughs and says, "Oh, I'll just keep doing it." And so the dog bites.
But here's my question. This is a good call. Here's my question. This dog, Commander, bit or otherwise attacked, and this has nothing to do with children being left alone, attacked Secret Service personnel at least 10 times. Now, that's not a child left alone with a dog. Then the other dog, Major, did the same thing. It's not being left alone with adults or with children. It's in rooms full of cops. If you had a dog, sounds like you know what you're talking about, and your dog bit 10 different cops, do you think you'd still have that dog?
Well, first,
kind of a yes or no, would you still have that dog?
I wouldn't have him around anybody else.
Well, then where would you?
So yeah, I'd still have the dog probably, because I think that probably, I wonder what the Secret Service agents were doing. And
it's their fault.
No. What I'm thinking is like, I get the impression that it's just an impression that Joe Biden, when he has his dogs, he does mean things to them, like he teases them,
like he does to you, like he does to us. No.
Yeah.
Same way. No, I don't know, but
I just don't think that dogs do anything unless they're provoked, or if somebody.
I don't know if I believe that, because the junkyard dog stuff and dogs getting, I think by and large. But there's aggressive dogs, and German Shepherds are, and Joe picks German Shepherds, and he's got Commander, but then he's got Major, and wait a minute, here's one. I'm a dog trainer. Let me see. Most of the time, it's about training to human for train the human to train the dog. Not really the dog's fault. Adolf Hitler's dog was named Blondie. That's right, it really was, and Adolf killed that mutt. So why? So what was rapid?
I had to be trained to train my dog. I'm an idiot when it comes to dogs, but my dog will do what I say. And I don't have to kick it or hit it or anything like that. And my dog is a really good dog around other people.
Oh.
And when I go, when I'm around other people's dogs, I have some kind of a communication with them, and I'm good to them. And I told a healer the other day that it's my next door neighbor's dog. Bark, 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 bark. And he had a toy. And I said, I'm not going to come get the toy. You have to bring it to me. And I said that 3 times, and that dog brought it to me.
See?
And it's the people. And you can't leave a child alone with a dog.
Joe Biden. Thank you, ma'am. All right. 303 696-1971. Lots of dog trainer people. It's the people's fault, not the dogs that bite. My dog Monty has never bitten anyone. Now there's a picture. He sends me a picture of Monty the dog. No, I mean I think there's plenty of dogs never bite people, but there's one. I mean, like my other question, no one has answered. I mean, is whatever happened to Major? I think Major sleeps with the fishes. Hey, this is Tim. Hey, brother, you're on the show. Good morning.
Peter Boyles, good to hear your voice, my man. How
my
you doing?
Boy, I'm good, man.
All right, good. Hey, Peter, I'm around these animals, and I'm not a pet person, but I'm around people with animals. And now this is an unscientific notice, but I find out that the animals take on the personality of their own.
Sure, of course.
And you can tell these nice, sweet ladies, and that animal is so nice.
Yeah.
And they stop, they let you pet them.
Yeah.
And then you have these ones pull their dog away.
Yeah.
And those dogs are mean and yapping
Yeah.
and want to snap at you.
Yeah, no,
So
I agree.
I found out, you know what? If you find a mean dog, you have a mean owner.
I think 100% you're right. I mean, it's the kind of stuff, or a negligent. Now, here's my question. So the first one they got is Major. Major was good for.
You sure his name wasn't Ramo?
That may say her Major was good for this. Commander is the second dog. The Bidens had Major that bit Secret Service, and then they said, well, they sent Major to live in Delaware. Do you think is Major still alive?
Rule of thumb, and I know ones that have pets and they get old, they get cranky, and they snap at a person one. And these are the nice people. That dog is gone.
Thank you.
Vicious.
Yeah, it's like,
one time.
He went.
It's uncalled for.
Yeah.
These are people. No matter what you do to their animal.
Yeah.
If that animal makes a snap.
Yeah.
That dog is gone. He's pet food.
Yeah.
And those are the decent people. Then I got the people with those chows. Those chows are known to be snappy.
Oh man.
Yeah, mean dogs. They got a black tongue.
Well, they always have like lists of the nicest dogs and the ones that'll come, get you, and then they always got those. But I know friends that have like. I used to date a woman that had a pit bull, which is really
was her name Miss Looney?
No, no, but she had, and the dog was great, but you just couldn't bring it around other dogs. I mean, because
but animals are protective of the owners, and and a lot of times, even the nice ones, and they sense fear in the owners, they will come to the rescue.
I agree with you.
But under any other circumstances, would they ever do that?
Yeah.
So when they see another dog, they feel that's a threat to their owner.
Absolutely.
And you can see them taking a stance on that. But when they're biting people left and right, the Major's not alive.
Yeah, but biting cops. I mean, if you had a dog that bit 10 cops, would you still have that dog? I mean, it's like,
you know what? Maybe that dog could bite one bad cop, but you know what? All 10 of them come out. That dog has to go. He probably is gone.
Remember, the cops are always shooting dogs. Like, get the dog. No, I'm serious. Get your dog back. Get your dog back.
That's right.
Man. Bam.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, Biden, he would be better off, Pete. It was just that, you know what, Major, we have to get rid of him. We put him down. He bit one of my security detail, and we can't stand for that.
He went
and just tell the truth.
He went to live with Jesus.
Hope this the dogs go to heaven. I don't believe that, but he said it.
Jesus did. But the point of it is, thank you, man. Thank you. Okay. Billy, where do we stand here? It is need a break. It's 8:49, 11 before the hour. The dynamic duo, two of my true favorite human beings, Joe Williams and Sandy Clough coming on. And Billy came in to correct. It's the NFL that suspended the Denver Broncos, not the Broncos. Stay here. Wednesday morning, Peter Boyles got the con. Brauchler's off. I'll be back here Friday morning, 5 a.m. Do it again. And then our show that goes on at 9 on Saturday mornings. 94 will be the high, and 94 again tomorrow, and 95 on Friday. Going to ride a motorcycle here this morning when the show is over. Dogs, this is maybe the most insightful message of the morning. Dogs listen to their masters or the alpha in the room. An aggressive dog is a dog that isn't trained well. Joe Biden and the Biden family also have a crackhead son that they didn't train very well either. Woo. Nice shot, Booth. Dogs listen to their masters or the alpha in the room. They do. It's a whole top dog, right? An aggressive dog is a dog that isn't trained well. Joe Biden and the Biden family also have a crackhead son. They didn't train well, too. Ooh, that hurt. 710 KNUS. Remember Pete Rose. We'll talk with the guys coming up. These are really just dear friends that come on the radio show, that except they know what they're talking about. The one and only Joe Williams, the hitman, and Sandy Clough. And I think this stuff is interesting. But go back to, remember Pete Rose. And remember the Black Sox. And remember prize fighting, going in the tank. And apparently, remember Mr. Snipes? They go, you call me Mr. Snipes. He went in the tank just recently to get a fight. So we'll come back and do all of that. 710 KNUS Denver Stock Station. Billy Thorpe's got the con. I'm Peter Boyles. 94 will be the high today. It is a Wednesday. Hang on. Peter Boyles in for George. I have also working on Friday morning. I will then also work our Saturday morning show, 710 KNUS. It's good to sit in the big seat on a Wednesday, the 26th of July, 710 KNUS Weather Center weather. 94 the high today, 94 on Thursday. Friday, 95 degrees. Also, the new column is out. Go to our website at 710 KNUS and click on shows. Comes to me, roll down. You can read the new column about the little health scare I went through. People wanted to know, so I wrote a piece about it. I saw this story about the NFL suspending the Broncos player for gaming violations. I immediately said, these guys, and I was going to ask them if they'd do the Saturday show, but it's even better today. Please say good morning and welcome back to dear friends and brilliant friends and people that are the right folks to be talking to. Number one, the hitman, Joe Williams. Joe, good morning. Welcome back to 710. Thank you and good morning.
And now for the revenue-producing part of today's program.
Sandy Clough. Sandy Clough.
Yeah.
Oh, Sandy, good morning.
How you doing, boys?
Hey, guys.
Good morning, fellas.
Hey, yeah.
Hey, Sandy.
So knowing that I was going to talk to you guys, I made a partial list of what I remember from sports gambling and why. And I think the most significant one, other maybe than Paul Hornung, Pete Rose. Take your time. What did Pete Rose actually do or not do?
Sandy, you want to take this?
Well, I'll take that. To make a very, very, very long story short, Pete Rose was found to have bet on baseball while he was the manager of the Cincinnati Reds. And possibly he gambled on baseball before that, but that was where the definitive evidence appeared. And he was issued more or less a lifetime suspension that could be reviewed by the then Commissioner Bart Giamatti, who unfortunately passed away a few weeks after issuing his ruling on Rose. And though Rose has made attempts through the years to be reinstated, he has failed in those attempts. And quite a number of years later, admitted himself in a book, of course, to have in fact gambled on baseball.
Does he belong in the Hall of Fame?
Well, of course, as a player, of course he does.
I think he does, with an explanation given on the plaque as to why years passed before he was elected and inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. But I think with an explanation on the plaque that would be sufficient in telling his complete story, yes, he belongs in the Hall of Fame and maybe in a special place apart from those who were elected and inducted the conventional way.
Are any
and Sandy, didn't he always say that he never bet on the Reds games? Said he didn't bet on the Reds games to lose, right?
He said he didn't bet on the Reds to lose. The problem with that, as you two know better than I do, is that unless he bet on them to win every game, other gamblers would monitor his bets and take the games he didn't bet on the Reds to win and bet on them to lose.
Oh, man.
Right.
Hadn't thought of that. Is there any Black Sox in the Hall of Fame?
I don't think so.
No.
Because that was the next one I
Most
wrote.
notably, Shoeless Joe Jackson is not
right.
Yeah. And
frankly, in my opinion, has a better reason to be there than Rose does.
Oh, I mean, if the stories are true, Ty Cobb is alleged to have said that was the finest baseball player he had ever seen in his life was Shoeless Joe.
Yes, and if you read the history, of course, you can come to differing conclusions. But I found, again, in reading about this, that he was more of a dupe than an active participant. He was not well schooled. He was not well educated.
He was illiterate,
and he got caught up in something. And remember, even for those times when baseball players made nothing, the White Sox players were notoriously underpaid and therefore susceptible to the lures of the gamblers.
So not one black. No, they called them the Black Sox. Not one Black Sox is in.
No.
Paul Hornung. What did Paul Hornung do?
Well, him and wasn't it Alex Karras, Sandy? God,
Yes.
that was a long time ago. Him and Alex Karras, they
60 years.
They
60
were
years ago.
suspended because they bet. Yeah, they bet on football.
Did they bet in the NFL or just generally?
I think it was. Well, I don't know. I don't remember. Wasn't it Pete Rozelle? Was it him back then? Sandy?
Yes. Yes.
God, we're going back a long way.
Now I did look, and Hornung is in the Football Hall of Fame.
Right.
He's in.
Well, I think Karras is too.
Oh, okay.
Both of them are.
Okay.
Karras is. Yeah.
Yeah, both of them are.
I met
the only difference there, fellas, was that Hornung was apologetic, contrite. Alex Karras was not especially contrite or apologetic. And Alex Karras reportedly threatened at one point to name more names if he were to be suspended.
Yeah. I met Karras when he was on a television show, and he had played Mongo in that movie. And I forget, and I was at KOA then. You and I were working together, and he came.
Yeah.
He was just a wonderful interview. He was just really good, and he was. Of course,
he's a character. He was a character. Yeah.
He had a part. He had a hand in pro wrestling, and he told wonderful storyteller. So I mean, he's the only one of these guys I ever met, but I thought he was wonderful. I just thought he was just great. And was it the one book is Ducks and Mad Bears or something about him? Oh, so we have Karras, who's in the Hall of Fame. We have Hornung, who's in the Hall of Fame. Pete Rose is not in the Hall of Fame. The Black Sox are not in the Hall of Fame. And now, how deep into gambling is the NFL league itself? Joe, how deep now are they involved?
Well, I mean, the NFL itself is in partnership, as we all know, with all these BetMGM and all they got their hooks in all of it, every bit of it. And it's kind of, the waters are a little murky in my mind about all of this. The players, they send them through dumb school, and here's what you're not supposed to do. And but they all got these apps, whatever the hell an app is. They've got those, and they can put their name in there, which is how the Bronco, I can't pronounce his name, how he got caught.
Uwazurike.
Yeah,
I mangled it yesterday, Joe, so I've had some practice.
So, but you can't do it in the facility. If you're in the facility, you can't go out there and bet on, Boise
on anything.
State to beat somebody on anything. If you're in the facility.
Facility,
what does
which could be the practice facility or the stadium.
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
So if you're on Bronco territory or land,
yes,
right,
yes.
But if you walked into the casino to the sports book, are you still in trouble?
I don't think
you
so.
You can't bet on football. You can't bet on football, but you could bet on other things. Yes.
But you can bet on horse races or anything else.
Yeah. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So the league suspends 5 players. 4 from the Lions, the Washington Commanders. What was the point and the reason behind all of that?
Again, the assumption would be that they violated those rules that Joe just spoke about in terms of gambling on a practice within the confines of a practice facility, and then perhaps at the stadium. I mean, I'm as confused about apps as Joe is, but I suppose it's possible that you could bet on games there. It's silly to imagine a player doing that, especially a fringe player. And I think Joe can correct me if I'm wrong, but virtually all these players suspended are fringe players. They're not stars. They're not big stars like Horney and Karras were.
Yeah.
Right.
Joe?
Horney and Karras were two of the best 5 players in the NFL at the time.
Yeah, you can't imagine what's going through some of these guys' minds, these so-called fringe players, and fringe by meaning, they're on the outside of the envelope trying to make a squad where, in real life, the kind of money that they would take down in real life, even though it's fringe money in the NFL, it's still, $1 million a year, maybe.
Oh, it's good money.
Something like that.
Enrique was a 4th-round draft pick.
Yeah, so he might make $200,000 or $300,000, $400,000, his first year. It depends on the point is why would a guy like him risk making that kind of money for a $150 bet?
Yeah.
I mean, why would you do that if you're him?
No,
you've got one stab in life at making an NFL roster, which very few people ever get a chance to do, and you have to wonder what's going through these people's minds when they pull stunts like this. And hey, look, I don't care about gambling. I gamble. I don't care. It doesn't make any difference to me. But I'm not going to get suspended.
Yeah. 303-696-1971. Joe Williams and Sandy Clough and Peter Boyle, 710 KNUS. The NFL suspends Denver Bronco player for a year.
Hey, Pete and Sandy, there's one other thing, too. I think the punishment does not fit the crime in this. I think it's too much myself. I don't know what the NFL is doing. You have guys who are domestic violence, which is far worse than what anything this kid did. And they get off in 6 weeks. Yeah. They might miss 6 games. I don't understand where the NFL is coming from there. I guess they're trying to make a point, maybe like swatting a fly with a 2x4. I don't know, but I don't think he should have been suspended a year. But they all know the rules. The players know the rules. It's been explained to them. They can't be idiots. So, I guess you live and learn. But now he's not only going to miss this season. If he were to make the team, let's say, I don't know if he would have or not. I don't even know who he is, but he's not only going to miss this season, but he's going to also miss the next off season. Which, in other words, the suspension will go from July the 24th now to next July the 24th, which really will put him behind the 8 ball in terms of making the team. But that's something I guess he gets to discuss with his family as to why he pulled that off.
Fellas, it's interesting because as a kid growing up, there wasn't, people talked about Vegas. There wasn't even an Atlantic City. There were bookies. And if you wanted to bet, and my dad and his brothers and uncles and stuff, they would bet. My grandma bet the numbers. And I think from my reading that when these other states and cities witnessed how much money Nevada was making and how much money Las Vegas was making, that they started rolling over to such things as the answer to the numbers business is a lottery system, or they tried Atlantic City or the Indian reservations or the gambling boats, all this kind of thing. And now I think you guys you may want to comment. A lot of sports talk radio today is just somebody trying to sell you winning combinations, and I listen to it and I think they're speaking another language now. They're playing, they're selling their secrets to how to win. So I know there's a question in there somewhere.
Well, Brent Musburger, everybody knows who he is.
Sure.
He started a gambling network in Las Vegas. They've got it's called, I can't remember exactly what the name of the network is, but it's syndicated. Sandy, I'm sure you've heard of it. And Musburger fronted the whole thing. His name's all over it. And all they do 24/7 on that station is talk about gambling.
Yeah.
And they're not coy about it. We're a gambling show. That's what we do. And that's right. And if you're not interested in the numbers, they won't hold your attention very long, because honestly, their content is more to do with, this team is minus 220. They're plus 430.
Exactly.
If you don't get the lingo, it's not going to appeal to you.
And I don't.
So.
Well, KEZW, the music of your life, K. Rick Crandall, isn't that radio station now? And I don't want to get anybody jammed up, but that's a gambling station now, isn't it?
Oh, I don't know, Sandy. Do you know? I didn't even know that.
I honestly don't know, but you both are correct. It's a rare thing to find a station that is basically prohibited from talking about any of that stuff, because as Joe said earlier, everybody, all the sports leagues, are in bed with these gambling entities now.
And why did the NFL make the decision that they're going to be now? I mean, and Joe points it out, and I've read it. They've climbed into bed with the book, I don't want to say the bookies, but the bookmaking operations, Joe.
Money. Yeah, of course. The money. There's so much money in there. Of course, they're obviously they can they tie it right in with the NFL. Hey, look, the NFL didn't become the most popular sport in the United States because you couldn't bet on games.
No.
I mean, that's
it.
That's why everybody watched it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And even when it was just Las Vegas and you had to go through your local bookmaker, everybody knew what was going on, and so did the NFL, even though they tried to act like they didn't.
I told you I read, by the way, Joe Williams and Sandy Clough and Peter Boyles, 710 KNUS on a Wednesday morning. It's going to be 95 for a high. I read, big deal, that back, Joe, when we were young men, that Friday night was high school football. Saturday was college football, and was it CBS but the new network was ABC. And so
ABC got the American Football League in the early 1960s.
Bingo. There you go. And then Monday night games were a way for the losers of the weekend to try and get well. That if they got clipped on
it turned out that way.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Now, was that the initial idea? Probably not. But
No. Actually, Monday Night Football was pure in the sense that it was not a Pete Rozelle concept.
Right.
Pete Rozelle was against it initially anyway. It was Arun Arledge.
Yes.
It was Arun Arledge and Dick Ebersol.
Yes. And they got
Arun Arledge and Dick Ebersol. Mm-hmm.
And they put an unlikely crew in there. It wasn't the straights.
Well, Keith Jackson was the first year play-by-play guy, right, Sandy?
Yeah,
I think it was.
And he
Keith
was a
Jackson.
traditional play-by-play man, but they hired Meredith and paired him with Cosell, and it was magic. The chemistry there between those two was magic, and it kept people watching. And Arun Arledge, and to an extent, Joe is right, Dick Ebersol, they understood that Monday Night Football had to be an entertainment vehicle.
Yeah.
It couldn't just be a kind of a Ray Scott, Pat Summerall style, very sparing play-by-play, few words. It had to be a show because it was competing in prime time. And it amazingly developed a huge audience in prime time, because even if the games stunk, and this is to this day an almost unheard of phenomenon, people would stay to hear Meredith jab Cosell, regardless of the score. They'd want to stay with the game, even those on the East Coast, a little bit longer, because there was always the chance that Cosell and Meredith would get into it.
They were drinking.
Sandy, wasn't the first one the Jets in Cleveland? Wasn't that the first Monday night game? It's the Jets in Cleveland. Yeah.
One of our close friends was part of the most memorable play in that game, Jim Turner, the late Jim Turner, who kicked off in the second half for the New York Jets to Homer Jones, who died within days of Turner's passing. And Homer Jones, a former New York Giant, playing at that point for Cleveland, returned the second half kickoff for a touchdown, and the Browns were able to hang on and beat the Jets from there.
And if what I've read about those Monday nights is that they were drinking in the booth. I mean, for real.
Cosell was in Philadelphia that first year, and he allegedly was also sick with the flu, but Leonard Tost, then the owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, had all three members of the team basically feted and was sending bottle after bottle of scotch up to the booth. And that for Cosell, who ended up throwing up on Meredith's booth.
That's the story.
And ultimately leaving the game by taxi from Philadelphia back to his home in Pound Ridge, New York.
He said he did it. One time they were doing a game at Denver, and Meredith comes on and says, "Welcome to the Mile High City," and I really am.
I all of those are
absolutely.
legends that Dandy Don. I mean, that could they do it now? Maybe, but in that moment, and if you read the old history of the Nielsen's where the television ratings, you guys they swept the night.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, and that's when football became the sport of the 70s. And it had already begun in the 1960s. I think the merger certainly helped in that regard. But football was on its way, and Monday Night Football was the vehicle that, of course, in 1970, beginning of the decade, catapulted the NFL to being the number one sport, the most watched sport in America. Which it still is.
Did Joe Namath make that when they took that ABC, when ABC took the deal?
Well, no, ABC had the games initially early in the 1960s. By the time Namath came aboard, the rights had shifted to NBC.
Okay.
Remember the Heidi game?
The Heidi Bowl?
That was on NBC.
Oh, was it? I read about it, but it was like they interrupted the game and started the movie, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Who was playing the game?
The Raiders and the Jets.
Yeah.
And the Jets were leading with a little more than a minute to go, 32-29. And at that point, most of the nation, maybe not the West Coast, I can't remember, but most of the nation cut away because Heidi was scheduled to start at 7 o'clock Eastern time. And it was a 4 o'clock game. And back then, NFL games generally didn't last more than 3 hours. But in this game, there was a lot of stuff going on, a lot of scoring, and the game ran long. And the Raiders came back with 2 touchdowns after they had cut away to win the game 43-32.
Meaningless answer to a trivia question that nobody would ever remember. The all-time winningest quarterback on Monday Night Football. You fellas want to take a stab at that?
Joe?
Kenny Stabler.
The Snake.
The Snake himself.
I spent time with the Snake.
Yes, I have too.
Yeah.
Many evenings.
Oh, you know what his daughters call themselves? The Snakeettes.
The Snakeettes, yeah.
They're the Snakeettes. Kenny.
He was a character. You know, the Coors people that we at the time, Sandy. I can't even remember if we were. You know, we've all been on the same station and other stations, so I don't remember what it was. But back in the 80s, Irv and I think Dave was with us. And Sandy, I'm not sure if you were, but Stabler, they threw a celebrity golf tournament for 2 years in a row, maybe 3 down in Durango.
Yeah, I used to go to it, Joe. I used to take the radio show down there.
we did our shows down there.
Yeah.
That's where we first hooked up with the Snake.
Me too.
And the rest, as they say, is history.
I remember who was the great big tight end,
Dave Casper,
coming down in the morning and buying a quart of orange juice, going over to the drinking fountain, pouring half of the orange juice out, reaching in, taking the white liquor and pouring it in to the orange juice bottle till it looked like it was all orange juice. Put the lid back on it, shook it, came over and did the radio show.
That sounds like a very light Malibu rum or something.
I rolled. It was so funny. And I got to know Stabler was an easy guy to talk to. And final moment, and we'll take a break and come back. He said, because I brought up Al Davis, and I'd read that book, Slick, The Life and Times of Al Davis. He said, and they had that great Southern Louisiana. And he said, I'd like to bury the hatchet with Al. And I'm thinking, oh, really? He said, right in the middle of his, then he had another word he used, right in the middle of his back. And I went, whoa. He was something.
Stabler and Al Davis did not part on good terms.
They did not part on favorable terms. And you have to remember, this is far off our subject, I suppose, but that Stabler was not a proponent of the vertical passing game that Al Davis popularized along with Sid Gilman. Sid Gilman really invented what is now known as the West Coast offense, the Sid Gilman offense. But Sid Gilman liked to throw the ball deep. And Al Davis became an assistant under Sid Gilman and loved the vertical passing game, loved the bomb. Well, that wasn't how Stabler played. Stabler was not there at LaMonica. He was more typical of quarterbacks passing today, in which the average yards in the air on a pass typically today is something like 10, 12 yards.
Stabler was one of those old time field generals, and he held it. And he held it against Davis because Davis played LaMonica in front of Stabler's first couple of years in the league, and Stabler, of course, was clearly a superior player.
I said, where'd you pick up the name? He said, high school. He said he was running down the field, and he said somebody in the stand said, that boy runs like a snake.
He was. You don't remember him that way, but he was very nifty in Alabama.
I got a break. I'm getting yelled at. I got a break. Hold on, you guys. We turn right back. Sandy Clough, the one and only Joe Williams. Hang on, everybody. Joe, you got it. 710 KNUS. Here we go, everybody. Good morning on a Wednesday morning. I get to do the show again on Friday. And then, of course, we do our 9 o'clock show on Saturday. It's the 26th of July. Nobody better than Joe Williams and Sandy Clough. 94 will be the high today and tomorrow. And bring the guys back up again. You know, when I was thinking about this after looking at this topic, and we were talking about athletes who are caught betting in their own sports, but sports was sort of divided up into, or I'm thinking, clean sports and dirty sports, sports that boxing in the 30s and 40s and the first, up until Rocky Marciano, boxing was terrible. Joe is as good, if not better than anybody I know when it comes to boxing and prize fighting. But how many people could trust prize fighting back then, Joe?
Yeah, I think there's a long list of, you found more guys, probably the promoters and the managers and the people who rigged the games. There were more of those guys than there were really the straight guys. We all remember, you know, the famous fighters, of course, you know, Joe Louis, and I mean, it goes like Henry Armstrong, and you know, it goes on and on and on. And the fight game, though, was pretty much rigged. I mean, you take a guy like Archie Moore, who, according to Burt Sugar and anybody else really who paid the attention, was probably one of the top 20 fighters, regardless of weight class, who ever lived. He did not, for many reasons. One of them was he was black, but he didn't even get a title fight till he was 35 years old. Think about that. Think about how good he must have been when he was 25.
Yeah. Oh, sure. But,
you know, and for whatever reasons, these guys all controlled it. And you went in there, and many times, just like Jake LaMotta, we all know Jake, you know, and I mean, he was offered money, dive money. And I mean, I just think it was second nature to the sport. And there are so many cases, so many examples. Sonny Liston, you know, he was mobbed up. I mean, there was, you can't really talk about boxing, you know, pre-1970 without talking about the mob.
Well, I just finished this really excellent book entitled "Getting Gaudy," and it's the Department of Justice and the FBI, and I've seen, and I'm a geek about reading about it, but how this guy from the inside, his name is Gleason, and he was the chief, and Diane Jackalone, who they would go after her, but they finally get Sammy Gravano, and Senate wants to do an investigation into fighting for whatever reason. And Gravano appears, and they ask him about, and he said, after Rocky Marciano, he said, there wasn't enough in it for us to fix. He said, then they moved, they had their drugs and, you know, and everything else they were doing. But he said, up until Rocky Marciano, and I don't know do you think Rocky Marciano ever had a or needed to have a fixed fight, Joe?
Listen, I was pretty young when he was in his heyday, and never really got to see him, you know, fight like on television or in person. You know, I've attended many fights in Vegas over the last 40 years, and I've heard people talk about Marciano and what a bull that he was. But I think, Sandy, if I'm not mistaken, I think at the top of his game, he only weighed about 185.
He was little.
As a heavyweight.
Right.
He was little.
Right. I mean, it just wouldn't, can you imagine him getting in there with somebody like, let's just say, for instance, Larry Holmes. Forget about Joe Louis. Larry Holmes. He would have no chance against somebody like that. You know, it just, but I mean, his legendary because he retired undefeated. You know, he's, and he was white. Let's face it. He was white. My father, who introduced me to the boxing game. And back in those days, and of course, I thought that Rocky Marciano being the heavyweight champion, I heard two names back then, Marciano and Sugar Ray Robinson. Those are the names that I always heard. But my father cautioned me about, he said, you know, there are fighters that you may not be familiar with. For instance, Ezra Charles.
Ooh.
Anybody ever heard of him? Yeah. Well, who in his prime, they said would have taken Marciano apart.
The Cincinnati, the Cincinnati Cobra.
The Cincinnati Cobra.
Yeah,
that's it.
Ezra Charles. Yeah. And he fought Joe Walcott. He fought a lot of people. But even when Rocky fought Joe Louis, the tax fights, Joe Louis had no business being in that ring. He was in his 40s by then, wasn't he?
Yes. Yeah. He fought on, and he was always broke, and they took advantage. They took advantage of him. And, I mean, think about Louis. He defended his title. Listen to this: 25 times he defended his title. 25 times. He held the title over 11 years. That's unheard of.
The Bomber.
Today. Yeah.
Joe, where do you rank him in? I love it when I have these guys on, because this just, like Billy and I said, it just goes free form. Where do you rank Louis in the top 10 heavyweights of all time?
Well, hey, Sandy's good friend, Bert Sugar, and we all used Bert's talents for many years on the radio, and he's put out a lot of books, interesting books. And Sandy, I would say, by the way, Sandy, wasn't he a good friend of your father's?
Yes.
I think he was, wasn't he?
It's a long story, but this would have been about 55 years ago. When I first met Bert, we were, our church was a church softball league, and Bert Sugar was our ringer.
Whoa.
We'd bring in Bert never attended a worship service at First Congregational Church in Chappaqua, New York, but he was our star shortstop.
I can tell you the services that Bert attended were the Betty Boop Bar in Las Vegas at the MGM Grand, because I was there many times with him.
I was at many parties with Bert, mostly when I grew up, and Bert. Speaking of characters, as we were earlier, Bert was the greatest character I've ever encountered in sports. But I've known Bert since I was 9 years old.
Yeah, and he was a true historian. Compared to him, I'm just a fight. He was a boxing historian.
So where did he place Joe Louis?
Oh, I think he had him right at the top, if memory serves.
Sandy?
I thought so. I thought so too. I don't think he had Ali at the top. Now you'll get an argument.
He had Ali. No, he had Ali behind Joe Louis in terms of heavyweights. I think he's got Robinson at the very top of pound for pound of all of them. Maybe him or Henry Armstrong. I can't remember.
Right.
Yeah, those guys that, like, when I was a kid and read fight history, and I had uncles that loved, like, Harry Greb and Stanley Ketchel. And, that's why today I can have conversations with people. I'm not in your leagues, but when they talk about, the Pittsburgh windmill and all that, because I listened to all of that as a kid growing up, and how they talked about those guys.
Harry Greb, he's the only guy that beat Gene Tunney.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
He beat Gene Tunney.
Yeah.
And he was fearless. I mean, and they were all carousers and drinkers, and then they'd get cleaned up and they'd go in and they'd fight, and and how much what that must have been like. But I'm going to take a break, and when we come back, let's wrap this up about gambling. And should players be able to gamble? Coming back with Joe Williams and the talented Sandy Clough. Stay here. All right, we got maybe 2 minutes left on a Wednesday morning. I could back here on Friday with Joe and, of course, with Sandy real quick. Joe, should the athletes be able to bet?
No, well, are you talking about NFL? What are you talking about?
Well,
which athletes?
Why would it? I mean, I don't think it would make a difference.
Well, the reason I ask you, because professional boxers bet on themselves all the time in Vegas.
Yes, they do.
But for instance, you've got to, the public at least has got to know the game is straight. So if you've got athletes, let's say, pick somebody, Russell Wilson betting on himself, or who knows? If you thought Russell Wilson was betting, I don't think it'd be good for the game.
Because of time. Sandy, should they be able to bet?
I'll quote Sean Payton here very quickly. This week, after the suspension was handed down, shame on us, and we're going to send them home for a year where they can't be around. The idea that you just go away, shame on us. But he did tell the players, you can't bet on NFL football ever, ever, ever. I don't give an expletive what it is. The other thing is, it's the same as the gun policy. You can't bet on nothing if you're at your facility, your hotel, your airplane. So wherever you can't carry a gun, you can't place a bet.
Wow. That makes all the sense in the world. That really is well said.
Well, that's why we listen to Sandy Clark.
I was going to say.
Well, listen, real quick. I know you just have a few seconds left. You were talking about hypocrisy, Joe, earlier on. Sean Payton is reading from your playbook, Joe. He said, I know this. There's a handful of owners that are owning these problems. He's talking about sponsorship agreements with gambling entities. Payton said a player can't have a share of DraftKings or FanDuel. It's shameful, embarrassing. He's talking about the NFL's hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And the owners can bet, right? The owners can bet.
Well, they have a share
in
these companies.
Sure, of course. You guys, thank you. Owe you both once again. Sandy Clough and Joe Williams. No one ever better. I love you guys. And we got to have something that we all need to, a project we need to do together. And I wish I knew what it was right now, because I'd say
You're the idea guy, Pete.
I know. Thanks, you guys, a lot. It means a lot. Thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you. Now, when tomorrow, I don't know who's doing a gig tomorrow. I get to come back and do Friday morning and then do Saturday. And there's a new mob book out that we can do on Saturday, part of that. People keep telling me, what's the name of that book? It's called Starkweather. And it's just about Charlie Starkweather. Maybe we can do that Friday. Thank you, Billy Thorpe. It's always good to be home. Take care.